Everyone can take their seats. We're just going to kick off here with a quick video to kind of introduce the morning, and then we'll kick off with opening remarks and then our first keynote. So, if we can.
We also have a procurement innovation lab, which is the PIL, and it falls under the Chief Procurement Officer. And they find different and new ways of making acquisitions easier for companies, whether that's for an integrator or for a software or any kind of emerging technology.
Helping a government agency understand that things that are commercially built and produced can be more secure than what they built themselves, can be cheaper, can be upgraded faster, and that loss of control doesn't lead to a loss of security. That's a huge cultural barrier for particular agencies.
Well, evolving technology is important to us in financial management and, quite frankly, the rest of the services we provide at the VA as well. But cloud-based technologies are very important to us. Using commercial off-the-shelf products.
I'm focused on more of the empowerment aspect of the acquisition professional at HHS, because I think empowerment through data, insights, and a faster process actually drives the uses of some of the vehicles that we put in place.
It's really important as IT leaders are looking at their modernization roadmap that they've got support from finance and acquisition. So when it gets to the point of procurement, they haven't created a roadblock from an acquisition perspective. They don't have the correct contract vehicle or policies in place to acquire the type of IT that the IT leaders need.
We really shifted gears in 2012, 2013, began to look at changing our acquisition strategy.
We've really focused on getting a single voice of the customer and being able to get feedback from our local sites, but to be able to impact them across the enterprise.
All right, good morning and welcome to our Acquisition Innovation CXO Tech Forum. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know we have some folks from across the world who flew in for this morning, so thank you so much for traveling out here and being part of our 12th CXO Tech Forum. My name is Michael Hoffman, and I'm the president of GovernmentCIO Media Research. GovernmentCIO Media Research is the online destination for thought leadership and research focused on the transformation of government IT. Our experienced team collects the best practices in research regarding the advancing technology and management landscape. Hopefully you got to meet a lot of the members of my team this morning who are walking around and talking to folks about a lot of those best practices and continuing our mission. We're extremely excited to have so many government and industry acquisition and procurement leaders this morning. And we're especially excited about our lineup, with a lot of those leaders in those areas joining us from agencies such as the U.S. Navy, U.S. Digital Service, Veterans Affairs, GSA, OMB, and many more. The inspiration for this morning's event came to us when talking about the acquisition and procurement of technologies in government. This is an area in which we've covered many times in many of our previous CXO Tech Forums with different panels. But we really wanted to dig in deep this morning and deal with a subject that's very important to so many different emerging technologies, whether it be AI, cybersecurity, and what have you. Before we kick off with our first keynote with Secretary Geurts, I wanted to make a few announcements. First, we're live streaming this morning's event, so good morning to everybody who's watching us in their home or office. We wanted to make sure that everybody who's watching on live stream, but also here, can take part in the conversation on social media. So please, if you can, use the hashtag CXO Tech Forum. Next, I'd like to thank our morning sponsors. MicroStrategy, MadPow, and Capgemini all played a major role in making this morning possible. So if we could have a round of applause for all three. Thank you. I also wanted to take a moment to recognize our charity for this morning's event. For every CXO Tech Forum, we donate a portion of our ticket sales to a charity that we choose. And this one this morning is one that is close to my heart, the National Brain Tumor Society. The reason being, I have a friend that's dealing with quite a few brain tumors, and we've worked very hard to raise money to build awareness in that area. Because to see the pain and struggle that they go through as a family on a day-to-day basis, very important. So we're really excited to be able to make a donation in that area. So thank you to everybody who is a part of that as well. All right, so what I'd like to do is introduce Secretary Geurts to the stage. Navy Assistant Secretary James Geurts is the Assistant Secretary for Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. He oversees an annual budget of $100 billion to equip and support America's sailors and Marines. Before joining the Navy, Secretary Geurts served as the acquisition executive at U.S. Special Operations Command, where his leadership led to innovative solutions to speed the best technologies to special operators located around the world. Secretary Geurts has 30 distinguished years in joint acquisition service and was one of the first leaders that we thought of when it came to putting together the agenda for this event. Secretary Geurts graduated from Lehigh University's ROTC program, where he earned a commission in the U.S. Air Force, and from there served in quite a few areas across, as he said, a joint service mutt in a lot of ways. He earned his bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering and also attended Harvard's Kennedy School's Executive Leadership Program. So, Secretary Geurts, can you join me on stage? All right. All right. So I'm going to start from the beginning. I mentioned your electrical engineering background, and I thought it was interesting because from a lot of the backgrounds that we hear about from acquisition leaders don't typically have that technical background. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that might have helped you, throughout your years of service?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Back in I was kind of born out of the late Reagan era. And the Air Force at the time had a very deliberate talent strategy. Mm-hmm. And their strategy was go find folks with technical degrees and put them right into the acquisition process as a second lieutenant. And that way you can, as a career, kind of learn the business. Some of the other services tend to bring in the acquisition military folks later in life. And I think the other, mindset of the Air Force at the time was if you're going to lead very technical programs, it helps having a technical background, and so that's served me well. I was kind of laughing on the way in because I was waiting to go on active duty and lived in an apartment right up the street here in Roslyn, and for about 9 months worked for a small IT business writing proposals. And while the technical degree helped me a lot, doing the billable hours during the day, BNP on weekends and nights, and seeing a company put itself out there for one RFP and trying to understand how to talk to the government, which was always sometimes hard to understand. That probably prepared me even more than a technical degree for coming in here. And so as I look at how the DoD needs to continue to shape its approach, a lot of it revolves around figuring out how to reduce the friction and increase the communication. Okay. Because I think sometimes we completely talk past each other, and we ask for things that either can't exist or aren't the right things. And then when folks propose an innovative solution, it doesn't match what we asked for. Therefore, we don't pick it, even though it's the better solution. And so, anyway, both of those have helped me a lot through the years.
All right. Well, like I was saying a little bit earlier, our theme for today is really talking about bringing on some of those best technologies, into federal and defense agencies. So you've seen quite a few changes over the years of service there, and as as the world has been changed and accelerating, how has that affected the acquisition and procurement processes as you've seen it?
So I think, just pick up the news this morning, right? We kind of live a little bit in what I would call the age of surprise, where it's really, I was talking to somebody else this morning. I try and write a 30-year shipbuilding plan. You try and write a 10-year business plan. And by the time you've started it and ended it, the world has changed 17 times in between. And so I think two kind of things as I look across the Department of Navy, right? This massive $110 billion a year, 260,000 contracts, everything from submarines to satellites. pretty broad enterprise. Two things are important, I think, to be successful as we move forward. And that's kind of the concepts of speed and simultaneity, right? So speed meaning what's your iteration speed? If we're going to be competitive as a nation, if I'm going to help secure the nation's security, pace has got to be an element of it. I tend to like velocity, right? Speed in the right direction. The government is also known for quickly sometimes moving in the wrong direction fast, because we don't talk to folks and don't kind of gather, ideas in a forum like this. So speed is really critical. And then I think the other issue is we don't talk a lot about is simultaneity. How to be able to do a very diverse set of things well at the same time. And so you can rig an organization maybe like SOCOM that's really good at going fast, and maybe an organization like the Navy where you're doing nuclear powered plants and maybe you don't want to go quite so fast. Being able to be good at doing both is really tricky. I mean, look at what the Navy's doing. Just read the headlines from yesterday. We're in the South China Sea. We just finished exercises in the Baltics. We're rescuing folks from a mining incident in Iran. And so that whole dynamic of being able to do all of those things at the same time with speed is really, I think, an interesting opportunity, because to do it, you can't just, to compete at that level, we can't just do what we've always done faster.
Okay. Well, you just mentioned, some going from SOCOM, Special Operations Command, and now working with the Navy. What was that transition like, especially when it came to, the speed of acquisition? Did you have, were there more opportunities? SOCOM might have that expectation there to move quicker than maybe, a larger service like the Navy.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I, quite frankly, took this job was to break down the notion you have to have a special in your name to go fast. There's a little bit of the notion that, you have to carve out a little thing and call it whatever its buzzword is, skunk works or special this, or I really think it is possible for large organizations to both work with speed and with depth. That's really hard to do if you only have one process and you only have one set of performers. And so I think, one of my lessons out of SOCOM, which was counterintuitive when I first got there, was I kind of thought SOCOM be very niche-y, and you had to be a SOCOM person all your life, and you had to be a SOCOM contractor all your life, and that was the only way you could get in there. And it was actually one of the more inclusive communities in terms of always looking for the best idea and rapidly getting it in the field. Some good lessons learned there. The other piece it's kind of obvious, but we forget, is kind of closing the distance between end user, developer, right, and buyer, which you say, yeah, no doubt, that's, DevOps or whatever. We forget that sometimes in government, and then we create buying organizations, and then they're separate from the customer organization. And even the customer organization, you have a headquarters or a fleet or a major command, and they're separate from the person on the flight line or on the deck. And so, this notion of closing distance, right, and opening up aperture is really important. The other piece, which, I really kind of, first thing I did to bring the Navy was massively decentralize the organization. So at SOCOM, this idea of decentralized execution with accountability is sometimes foreign to really large organizations where we create stacked up bureaucracies, and then we think if we just add more layers, that will add to a better decision. And so one of the first things when I came in was everywhere we can decentralize, because then I can hold somebody accountable, and it turns out that helps get better ideas out there quicker. And so I think all those are applicable, not just to a Navy, it could be applicable to other government agencies. Quite frankly, it needs to be applicable in business, because a lot of the large businesses suffer from the same, it sometimes cracks me up when I hear a big industry partner say, hey, we want to go fast, and why aren't you going faster? Okay, here's my RFP. Okay, well, we got to clear that, $5 million bid through headquarters. That'll take us 3 months, right? And, we all laugh, but we've all been there, right? And so, it takes both sides working together in a transparent and trusted environment. That's what we're trying to create in the Department of Navy. It's not a process or a specific tool or one specific tool won't solve this, right? It's kind of be a mindset driven through trust, credibility, and transparency that will really allow us all to kind of go at what I call rigging for speed.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Was
Yep.
you've mentioned rig for speed a couple times,
Yep.
and could you talk a little bit about what that really means to you and how that's going to be applied to the Navy going forward?
Yeah. So again, I think of effort almost in calorie burn, and are we burning our calories on things that make a difference? And bureaucracies can kind of be like boats in the water, if I want to use a maritime analogy, right? You never know where a barnacle comes from. You don't know where they're born. They have no natural enemies. You don't feel each individual one attached to your boat, but after about 5 years, you're going about half the speed and you don't know why. Mm-hmm. And the only way to go after that's a deliberate and violent action, right? So part of what we're trying to do in the Department of Navy is, I'll say, scrape off the barnacles on both sides of the relationship. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes down to, I kind of called it the 4 Ds for me. Decentralize the organization, right? Put decision-making at the lowest capable level. And I'll underline capable, because you can decentralize if you haven't trained a workforce or don't have the right industry partners. That can create some chaos. A second piece is differentiate the work. So how I go about building a nuclear submarine that's got to last for 50 years and protect people and all that needs to be fundamentally different than how I am developing the acoustic algorithms that are sitting on that submarine. And so, a submarine we're going to build once lasts for 50 years. Right now, we want to change, and we are changing the software out every 18 months and all the compute out every 36 months. But you've got to differentiate that work. If I want to do DevOps software app development, that shouldn't look like how I build a nuclear aircraft carrier. Bureaucracies on both sides, you're just a version of us to some degree if we're not careful. Just try and pick the lowest common denominator and have one process that does everything. And then if you're not careful, you kind of get a Sawzall that does everything mediocre-wise. So really coming up with a bunch of different approaches and tools. I think when I left SOCOM, we had 17 different ways to acquire something, right? So if I can come up with a bunch of different tools and then empower and enable the workforce to pick the right tool and let them go run with it, then we'll get speed. Third piece, again, where a lot of you come in, is really take advantage of the power of digitization. Right now, to some degree, all we're doing is doing in digital what we've done the same way in analog. But we own 2 of the most complex digital models in the world, a nuclear submarine and nuclear aircraft carrier. Thinking through, if you really have a digital model, how does that fundamentally change the business relationship, how we support the ship, how do we repair the ship, how do we bring IT, you can kind of fundamentally rethink how we're doing system. Right now, I've given the guys a challenge. You have 24 hours to get from compile to combat, right? So I want you to be able to write code and in 24 hours have it compiled through all the integration checks, all the cyber checks, disseminated all around the world and uploaded on the combat system. We're not going to be able to do that just by doing the old process faster, right? We're going to have to fundamentally, it's causing us to fundamentally rethink how we approach stuff. And then the last one, and not because it's last, because it's least important, but most, is develop talent, right? We are all challenged with getting talent in the depth and breadth that we need. And we're not going to be able to do it as a Navy all organically. So then how do we create a much more fluid talent mechanism where it's okay for you to come in government for 2 years and learn and then bounce back out, or vice versa, where we can create programs to leverage each other and break down some of the barriers. The revolving door, to my mind, ought to be much faster. And so I think we challenge those 4 Ds as a community. We'll position ourselves to win. Most folks don't know, right? 90% of the world's commerce travels over the seas. 95% of the world's internet and communications travels under the seas. Again, just pick up the news for the last 2 weeks. For the Navy, for the nation to be strong, you need a strong Navy that can be competitive all around the world simultaneously. We cannot do all that organically. right? That's where we've got to break down our own preconceived notions. I kind of like the video of, you have to own it to trust it. I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah. So when you were at U.S. Special Operations Command, I was able to take a tour of what looked like a small brick building in Ybor City, which is outside headquarters there. And I didn't know what to expect because I heard about this thing called SoftWorks quite a bit. And that was an initiative that you really championed when you were at U.S. Special Operations Command when it came to, like you were saying, bringing in new talent. You wanted to create a way in which some of these smaller technology companies or some of these other minds could tackle some of the harder challenges that special operators were facing from the battlefield. So there was the creation of SoftWorks. Could you talk a little bit about how that came to be, why you think it was successful, and how you are applying that to the Navy now with the creation of Naval X?
Yeah, sure. So my concern at SOCOM at the time was a very successful organization, incredibly successful on the battlefield, incredibly susceptible to not seeing something changing in the world. So it's really hard to change when you're good at something, right? Right? It's really hard because, you got books written about you, you got movies written about you, and we tend to overvalue that expertise and then don't understand when something changes, and that expertise may not be the expertise that allow you to be successful. So the old, military is really good at winning the last war kind of thing. The other challenge that worried me down there, which worries me a little in the Navy, we'll talk about that, is there's lots of great ideas out there, and as the percentage of the population in the country is less and less military experienced or military connected, I thought to myself, if you had a great idea for SOCOM, how would you get to me? And I couldn't figure it out, right? If it takes you hiring a business development person who used to be in SOCOM, and that's a 3-year process, the really good folks just aren't going to deal with that. They're going to move on. And so I was really afraid, one, we made it really hard to get good ideas in, and then two, we didn't have somewhere that would challenge our own thinking. And so that was kind of the SoftWorks model, open door, anybody can come in and really get the kind of return on collisions up. Navy, so, I was a little bit, everybody, first I came in the Navy, where's the Navy works? And I'm also sensitive that what works somewhere else doesn't necessarily work in the same form. The Navy, to its strength, has an incredible depth of technical talent. They did not, like at some of the other government agencies, rid themselves of good organic talent. The challenge in the Navy, it's a very widespread set of missions, right? Everything from submarines to aircraft carriers to ships, and we're fairly dispersed, right? 20 warfare centers across the country. So the real issue for the Navy, first issue, is connecting ourselves to ourselves. There's a little bit of innovation theater going on around the country right now, and everybody has their innovation thing, which is great, but they're not necessarily connected. And you could be in Newport, which may be our cluster for undersea innovation, and have a great idea that could help, let's say, the aircraft side of the Navy, and you have no way to kind of arc that gap. And so what we've done is create what I'll call a thing called Navy X. And their whole mission is connect up all the elements within the Navy that are kind of pressing on this agility piece. They're not to invent things, they're to get you to the folks who are inventing things and connect pieces together. We're doing a thing called Tech Bridge, right? Which is, hey, if you've got a problem, you can connect in this Navy X network and you'll find a person who may have a solution somewhere across the Navy or through other folks. Or if you've got a solution, you can walk into any kind of one of these nodes and suddenly that solution can get broadcast across the network and looked at. I think if we can do that connection piece now, again, for a very large organization, one little innovation hub is not the secret to the Department of the Navy innovation. It is connecting up all of our vast pockets of innovation occurring in isolation. And that's kind of what Naval X is doing. We do have a storefront similar to SoftWorks. Okay. So if you go down, it's down in Alexandria. Anybody can walk in. We're going to mobilize our small business. So I've got a network of small business professionals So if you don't know how to do business with the Navy, or you're not sure how to do business with the Navy, they're going to be kind of in these nodes. Again, you don't have to get a Pentagon pass and figure out who to hire, who knows somebody to get into an office. It's really kind of walk in the door. Because in my mind, the easier I make it for you to bring us an innovative solution, and the way to do that in the least amount of time and the least amount of cost will attract you bringing us innovative solutions. If it takes you 9 months to fight through the bureaucracy and hiring a bunch of overhead, that's not likely to be a path to success. And then the third piece they're doing for us is building playbooks, back to this idea of lots of tools. So we are, I'm not very smart, I'm a hell of a poacher, right? I will steal from anybody. So my favorite form of R&D is rip off and deploy, right? And so whether it's a best practice in industry or a best practice in another government agency or a best practice in a sisters, these super connectors are all there out hungry to connect, right? And their measure of performance isn't invent. So a lot of, sometimes the worst collaborators are innovators, right? They love it if you pick up their idea, but maybe not somebody else's. And so how do I then, I've got a 70,000 person government workforce. Training that talent on all the different tools can be really challenging if you're doing it, where each has to learn from scratch. Yeah. So if you've got ideas, you want to, walk in the door. Mm-hmm. If you don't know how to do business with us, we'll link you up with a small business professional, one of our buying professionals. If you've got an idea that you just don't know where to shop it in the Navy, these connectors, this Naval X team is here to kind of work across it. I think there's some real opportunity there because, right, we're not going to find more money. This is not a money issue. It's not finding the golden process issue. It's connecting folks in a culture that values, right, mission output, not process compliance.
Yeah, I think that's extremely powerful. I mean, I got to see it firsthand when I was down in Ybor City. I think there was a group that came in with some ideas to apply to some of the drone technology that SOCOM was working on. And it was just powerful to see them come, introduce themselves, and there was a process in place to get them right in the door. A smaller company didn't have, like you were saying, the business development background, but were able to gain access and start that process. Yeah,
last year, we awarded over $15 billion direct to small businesses primes. Wow. And so, there is ample opportunity. And some of the business, particularly in the IT business space, the other thing we're doing is opening up our architectures and approaches, right, to get out of a little bit of what's traditionally been an OEM lock. Right, so we have now built full digital twins for our most complex weapons, our Aegis combat system. And so you could envision being able to walk in, and if you have an algorithm, being able to immediately put that on the network, play around with it, and then demonstrate a capability for the Navy without having to fight all the way through the kind of big prime contractor. And there's a great role for prime contractors, building large ships and putting architectures together. It's not an either or in my mind, it's an either and I think this will help us get there.
Wonderful. Naval agility is something that you're really focused on in one of your priorities as well. Could you talk a little bit about what that means and how that applies to the Navy?
I'm not a big fan of innovation as a term because I think we hide everything we're doing under that term, and you can do what you were doing yesterday and call it innovation, and it kind of means everything to everybody. I tend to like, a little bit back to my SOCOM. What was one of SOCOM's real strengths? What was the strength of the Navy in previous lives? It's agility, pivot speed, right? If you just, again, turn on the news. Okay, I have a new problem this morning that happened at 2 this morning, didn't know about it. How am I going to go after that problem? And so creating both a mindset, a business, and a technical architecture that values our ability to pivot, right? Underpinned by talent, not just government talent in the entire industrial base is really important to us. If I look back at any time where we've been able to be very competitive on the global scale, it's because we can pivot faster than our adversary. Now that our technology gap isn't what it used to be, that becomes even more and more important. And you're not going to have strong pivot speed if it takes 3 years to get something on contract. You're not going to have strong pivot speed if you've got closed architectures where we can't quickly snap things in. We're not going to have pivot speed, right, when ships are sitting at the dock because we haven't figured out the right repair business process or used the latest in preventative maintenance driven by AI or whatever the things are. And so, if you want to do business with us, the two things, back to the speed and simultaneity, right? It's going to be what's our iteration speed and what's our ability to pivot, because none of us will predict what's going to happen well in the next 10 years. We may have some ideas, we may have it broad, but we're not going to know. And if we rely on perfect prediction, we are not going to be competitive as a nation. That's what I'm trying to kind of get out. And it's counterintuitive to a large bureaucracy that prides itself on 50 years of expertise in an area, right? It takes some organizational humility to understand that there's a better idea out there, and it's better for us to grab that better idea than try and invent it ourselves.
Okay. Has that been a challenge for you in terms of dealing with, pivoting that cultural mindset?
Sure. I mean, again, the strength, I think the strength, I am very, very proud of the way the Navy has, and when I say Navy, Department of the Navy, both Navy and Marine Corps, they've taken it on as a challenge. They're not fighting it from we don't want to do it or we don't believe we need to do it. The trick for all of us is the mechanics of how to do it on both sides of the aisle. Because I can write a very flexible acquisition strategy that may not work for you as a business strategy if you're in industry. So it's a big Navy, we're not going to turn on a dime. And I kind of go back to this, and we've got to be good at lots of different things. So DevOps is great, and a DevOps mindset is great, maybe not for my nuclear reactor, right? And that's good, and we should celebrate that differentiated piece. I think there's a trust element on both sides, right? You've got to trust our system. We've got to trust your ability to deliver. We don't talk enough about that trust. But I think if we get our speed up and our iteration speed up, we'll learn even if it doesn't work.
Okay.
And that to me is one of the elements that I think will enable success for us. We've got to do it. It's not like, it's hard, right? The only person that likes change is a baby with a wet diaper, right? I mean, we all like to be the person directing change. We all hate to be the one being directed to change, right? I mean, it's just, it'd be easy if it wasn't for humans. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much that it isn't happening at the, because somebody said it was thing or did an interview or something, right? And quite frankly, in the DoD, stakes are incredibly high, right? I'm not a startup that I can afford to fail. You cannot afford for me to fail as a Navy. Translating that, but it's okay to fail when we experiment and try things is a hard, it's just a very challenging, that's why I love innovation in public service, because it's really hard, right? But if we don't do it, we're not going to succeed. And so to the degree that we can open up our aperture to invite in new ideas and celebrate new ideas and celebrate, as Dr. Roper says, celebrate, rapid learning moments, which may not be a program success, but you learn something from it, I think can really be powerful. We have the capability to do this. I'm not in the victim defeatist mode. We've done this multiple times as a nation. Just in my 18 months, I've been amazed on both sides, industry and the government, at some of the things we've got to be able to do. Now it's just really scale, right, and making it sustainable so it's not a cult of personality or a once and done, and then a year from now we kind of, organizations are like big pieces of plastic. You apply a lot of heat, they'll bend a little bit. When the heat goes, they'll want to snap back, right? Unless you change things at the molecular level. And so what I'm asking for your help is help us change it at the molecular level. Let's not just call what we've always done something different, and then as soon as the heat goes away, it snaps back. That's not where we need to get to. We need to go after some fundamental change. The only way we're going to do that is working together.
Okay. I think that's a great place to finish here.
Okay.
So I want to thank you very much,
Sure.
Secretary Geurts, for joining us. That was a great opportunity there. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
All right. So our next panel, thank you again, Secretary. That was fantastic, talking a lot about different topics that we have here. So our next panel is going to be a little bit of a pivot, like Secretary Geurts was saying, over to health acquisition. This is an area that's been really exciting, and we're really excited about the collection of folks that we're going to have on the panel for you today, where we're going to have folks from both Health and Human Services, as well as the U.S. Digital Service, join us here today, talking about some of the issues that include taking a look at different healthcare models, different acquisition models to kind of keep up with the speed of that digital service, and just kind of breaking down some of the areas which are working and some of the challenges that the different industries have been facing thus far. So what I'd like to do is invite our Vice President, Megha Chokshi, to join me here on stage. She'll be moderating the next panel, and she'll be the one introducing our panelists. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Megha Chokshi, VP of Data Analytics and Strategy at GovernmentCIO. Very excited to be here. We have a great panel. We have representatives from Health and Human Services and CMS and also the private sector, MedPow, to talk about not only how are we looking at the different acquisition strategies, the innovation that are being put in place to attract and address the needs of internal and external users in the health tech industry, but also look at the wide selection of different tools and technologies that are out there. What are these agencies doing to actually select the best of breed and then address user needs and the changing scenarios? So I would like to invite to the stage Oki Mek, Chief Technology Officer, Division of Acquisition, Health and Human Services. You're going to pivot a little bit. Mishu Tasneem, she is a U.S. Digital Service expert at CMS. Todd Simpson, the Chief Product Officer at Health and Human Services. And finally, Amy Heymans, the Founder and Chief Experience Officer at MedPow. And since we have a full panel, I am going to pivot as well and go on the other side of the stage. So we have a lot to discuss today, and before we get started, I wanted to give an opportunity for each one of you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you do, and some of the challenges that you're facing as you move towards some innovative practices within your agencies or your organization.
Thanks, Todd.
Yes, absolutely.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. First off, I want to thank all the sponsors. Without them, this would not be possible. My name is Oki Mek. I am the CTO for Division of Acquisition. I'm actually a cybersecurity guy. I have been around. I think, my principle on cybersecurity is that you have to understand the business in order to safeguard the business. Just knowing cybersecurity is not sufficient. So I've been with grants. I've been with HR. I've been with acquisition. I've been with finance. I've been with IT. I've been with everywhere. I was trying to understand all the businesses within the federal government. But I think at the end of the day, I think all administrative systems should really be communicating with one another to support the mission. And that's why I've been around. I think that's a good perspective from different businesses to really understand cybersecurity. But at the end of the day, I am a cybersecurity guy, but I do everything.
I'm. It's on. Okay, I think it's on now. Hi, I'm Mishu Tasnim. I'm with the U.S. Digital Services, leading the modernization effort for the payment systems that run Medicare claims currently over at CMS. I've kind of taken a roundabout way to this position from engineering through several government agencies as a contractor and now working on the federal side. And it's been a very interesting ride getting over here and sort of seeing how you drive innovation and like where procurement really fits in as a critical piece of how we deliver services to the government and then as taxpayers, how we receive those services.
I'm Todd Simpson. I'm the Chief Product Officer at HHS. I've been in federal service now for about 10 years. I've held various CIO roles at different agencies across the government. In my current role, I'm focusing on shared services, and I say that kind of a little bit cautiously because I'm going to follow a crawl, walk, run model toward that shared service kind of common operating environment model that I think you know at a certain level of maturation we'll achieve. But right now I'm focusing on just baselining, getting software inventories, code inventories, so we can do code reuse and single license software reuse, and journey mapping with my vendors. And I've got 4 or 5 rather big initiatives in my wheelhouse that I'm trying to get over the finish line that I think will be truly transformative to HHS, which I'll talk about in a little more detail throughout this panel, hopefully. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Heymans, one of the founders at MadPow and Chief Experience Officer. I'm a designer and founded the company 17 years ago, and we started, we were born human-centered. Most of you know what that is, but just an overview, it means that we're going to involve the people who will be affected by the solutions we create in the process of creating them. And so 17 years ago, and still now, it's all about making digital solutions useful, usable, and desirable for the people who are interacting with them. But then we realized, okay, digital is important. It's a thread through everything, but digital is not enough. It's about the entire experience somebody has interacting with an organization, that omni-channel experience. So we help organizations that we work with develop a really deep understanding of the people they serve, gaps, unmet needs, opportunities, and then design services to meet those needs. And then we realized, okay, digital's great, services, very important, overall experience, yes, but what about the decisions really complex human beings make when no one's looking? What about trying to get toward that really difficult change moment? So we built a behavior change design practice that focuses on designing interventions focused on helping people to change their attitudes, perceptions, mindsets, and behaviors. A lot of work in health with government and industry, but also in finance and social impact. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you so much. So our first question was really kind of segues into the initiatives that all of you all mentioned. What are some of the initiatives that you're working on that uses an innovative acquisition strategy and approach? And what kind of challenge or challenges are you trying to address when you kind of look into this innovative approach? Okay.
So at HSS, we are using emerging technologies to transform acquisition lifecycle. We believe our approach, model, and the technology we're using are the future of how we modernize and how we run IT operation. Our approach is really focusing on the mission of HSS, focusing on the business needs and trying to find out what issues are we trying to solve. I always say there's no such thing as IT project. There's a business project with IT components. You should never focus on IT. We did a data map and looking at, kind of brainstorm what we were doing in terms of solving an issue. We didn't even think about IT until the end. We think about the business and what are we trying to solve. We line it up with President Management Agenda, focusing on transparency into data. We look into the Megabyte Act, Data Act, the GAO audits. We were looking at regulations and mandates, including MGT as well. And kind of like, because what the agency is looking for is looking at for those mandates. Also, we do a very incremental modular approach. OMB is pushing for this. We do something small and then move up as we go in a 2-3 week sprint using human-centered design as well. Our slogan is really that we are having the workforce build the system, not us. So basically, we're really focusing on the workforce, getting their pain points and issues. We brainstorm, we prototype, and we take it back every 2-3 weeks, just cycle it through. Using human-centered design, DevOps, Agile, what do you want to call it, microservice model as well. So very incremental approach. You're not going to get everything perfect the first time. You could pivot. If you fail, you could fail quietly, but you have to learn from it and keep on going. We are using emerging tech. We're using blockchain. We are the first blockchain network that's been ATO within the federal government. That was we think that is a big accomplishment for us in terms of moving toward the new technologies. We are using robotic process automation as well to analyze, to move data around, using machine learning to cleanse the data. Think of TurboTax, and you think about, because the acquisition is very heavy in paper. I always say, TurboTax, think about the evolutions of filing taxes. Back in the 50s, 60s, it's very paper-based. You can't analyze paper, I can tell you right now. It's very paper-based processes. Early 2000, you could file your taxes online. But nowadays, if you use TurboTax, you could file your taxes within 30 minutes because the data is being aggregated, being digitized, being moved around, pulling from different systems. And that's what we're trying to do in terms of acquisition, is really focusing on the TurboTax model, digitizing the data, build good data taxonomy, analyze the data, and then share the data. And that could be applied anywhere, not just acquisition. I think that could apply in any business field. That's why I think it's a future of how you modernize and how you run IT.
I'll speak to our acquisition vehicles that we've started. So what CMS is trending towards now is using blanket purchase agreements where you kind of do your vetting up front. All the vendors apply or submit their proposals initially. What that then allows us to do is reduce the time that it takes to review. We understand that proposals also are a pretty heavy lift for organizations on the corporate side, because a lot of these organizations are small businesses and don't always have the staff necessary. So doing that blanket purchase agreement model allows benefits for both the commercial side as well as the federal side. On the federal side, it saves us a lot of time from sitting in a lot of these reviews. For example, the most recent one that we just kicked off, we initially had 73 responses. We whittled that down to 6 awardees. Now in the future, when we put task orders out on that, we're at like max reviewing 6 proposals as opposed to 73 every time, which takes the staff away from building the product. Instead, they're just continuously in this review cycle. So that's one of the key features. The other feature of the BPA model is, and this is, I think, trending not just at CMS, but across other agencies as well, is having a design challenge component. So it's no longer enough to just submit a really shiny proposal that's very well written. It kind of levels the playing field a little bit to don't just tell us about the work that you've done or your great ideas, actually show us that you are agile or you believe in human-centered design. How would you approach human-centered design? And show us, submit artifacts, submit code, get us a working prototype. That's one of the other features. And the third feature that I'll mention here is the shortened period of performance. That way, the benefit on the corporate side is, your staff that are working on it, they're excited about it because there's always a design challenge to respond to. The work is always impactful and meaningful, and there's sort of an end date. No one's going to come in there and just like, well, why am I doing this? This is a 5-year contract. Yes, I understand that does take away from stability, but like knowing that you're on a BPA for the 5 years should provide that stability. Again, and I know coming from the contractor side, I understand the pain points of, continuously wondering like, is my contract going to continue on? Building in flexible teaming arrangements also encourages that collaboration to continue throughout the contractor community. And then on the federal side, what that allows us to do is to iterate. You have a product idea, you start with an 18-month period of performance, you realize that this idea is probably not going to take wings, and you're not beholden to a 5-year contract just asking contractors to do things that might not be meaningful for the agency.
So I can't really speak too deeply about innovative approaches around acquisition strategies. I've been trying to get my program off the ground for the last 15 months and trying to kind of define an identity for the Chief Product Officer office, if you will. And so kind of in line with what Oki was saying, getting back to the basics and just understanding what the business requirements are, what the use cases are. So often in government, I've walked into situations or into roles where I found a bunch of software that had been purchased just sitting on the shelf, not installed. It was purchased because maybe somebody thought it would be a good addition to the toolbox, or but it was bought without a strategy or without an integration partner to install it. And us being the feds that we are, I guess we can't put the CD or the disk in the computer without, being snarky. But the bottom line is, when you have those failures in the acquisition process, it'll just kill the project. It'll die on the vine. And similarly, you'll have that kind of buy it and never deploy it kind of thing that happens. You'll have this proof of concept syndrome that occurs where people just say, oh, I'm going to do a proof of concept. I'm going to build this thing. And they don't really have a plan or a strategy. They may have money because there's some pocket of money that some bureaucratic office somewhere created and said, this is for modernization. And if you're clever enough, you can put anything in that bucket. So I think for me, I'm making sure that when customers come to me, we've spent a lot of time developing a CRM workflow. We're 2 octaves short of having that across the entire enterprise. I think that's very, very important, because once we have that interconnectivity, we'll be able to get to different areas of the business. When we're doing data projects, we'll be able to connect the data stewards and identify all those different pockets of people that own those different resources. And it'll come in really handy when we're building those communities of practice around the products that we're delivering. And to those products, we're focusing very, very hard, or heavy on data. One of my biggest projects is an administrative data hub. And one of the data sets that I'm going to have in that administrative data hub is the Accelerate procurement data. And we're also going to have Accelerate standing next to that administrative data hub. So at HHS, I think we're trying to position ourselves right now to be able to make better decisions. Oki said transparency, and that's really the name of the game. It's going in, and when customers come to us, giving them alternatives, letting them choose, and then kind of carrying that customer through that arduous process that's fraught with all kinds of disconnects. Like, we talk about DevOps and agility, but then we have these arcane EPLC processes that just chokehold you when you're trying to run something through quickly. And you might have everybody bought in, but you've got to get these bureaucratic kind of toll gates crossed. So I think reconciling all that, probably in my experience at HHS, is the biggest challenge we have ahead.
So I'm not a procurement professional, but I will talk about how we're adding value to helping organizations achieve their objectives. First, it starts with understanding the people served. What are their needs, their wants in their lives? What are their jobs to be done? And what are their behaviors? So we often establish behavioral archetypes to guide our decision-making process in terms of what we're going to do to better serve these people. Again, what are their attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors that shape how they're approaching an experience, so that we can then take a step back and look at the whole picture, the whole experience, and set a vision for where we're heading. My friends mentioned journey mapping. We're doing that to say, okay, across the ecosystem of interaction, what are the touch points, where are the problems, and where are the opportunities, and create this lighthouse or North Star vision for the organization to shoot toward, but understanding the climate of change, also deliver actionable recommendations that can be implemented in the short term. And then we're also helping organizations to make a cultural shift. We know the organizational objectives, but once we understand the human needs and the human objectives, we can try to find that virtuous circle between organizational success and social impact. And that involves a cultural shift. So we're often working with technology and business professionals to look at the process. How are we incorporating the people we're serving into our process? How often are we asking them? And not just through data and quantitative touch points. That tells us what's going on, but doesn't tell us why it's happening or how we might improve it. Bringing the outside in, people to the table of innovation, and establishing design ops. We've heard a lot about DevOps. There's also a thing, design ops. How are we incorporating human-centered design into solving the really challenging problems in front of us and manifesting these opportunities? So that's sort of where we've been providing value across government and with clients like Fidelity, Cleveland Clinic, Humana, CDC, et cetera. They're excited for these things. Yeah.
Great. So one of the things that I kind of heard across all four of y'all was human-centered design. Everyone seems very passionate about the approach and also using that when you're addressing the challenges within your organization. So taking that one step further into IT modernization, there is a large gap right now between the emerging and the new technology and where the legacy systems stand. So how are you using human-centered design to address your IT modernization and meeting the user needs? Both for CMS and HHS, not only do you have your external users, the patients, the doctors, but you also have your internal users, and that is, it's a large community with a variety of different interests. So how do you take all of these interests and then bring it into, using human-centered design, bring it into the IT modernization component?
For us, we use human-centered design as a mechanism to not just understand the pain points, but as well as getting them engaged and kind of talk through, collaborate on, what is CMS is doing well, or CDC is doing well, and then they start collaborating because one agency might be good in one area, one agency might be good in one area, but it's good to, one person doesn't know everything. It's good to get knowledge and sharing of knowledge. That's how you innovate and modernize. You have to share knowledge. But really, the other thing that really human-centered design is helping us a lot is getting buy-ins, really getting them to be involved in a modernization effort, and not just taking requirements and coming back 5 years later and said, oh, I built something, but does it really support the mission or the requirements? You don't know that because things shift a lot. Leadership, could shift. There's changeover. 5 years, heck, you might not even remember what was the project about when you do a big modernization. But if you go back to them every 2-3 weeks and get them really fully engaged, get them excited about the work, I think that's really the key component of human-centered design is collaboration and getting people to be getting involved instead of saying, sometimes they just don't understand what you're doing. But if when we first talk about blockchain, we talk about transformation. When we meet with the workforce, first they said like this, like we don't know what you're talking about. But that affects the program. But if you keep on going back in them and trying to get, what is your pain point? I want to solve the issue. Don't worry about the technology. I want to solve what's your pain point. And that's very powerful in terms of getting buy-in, getting people to work together. Because HSS is so big, we spend about $24 billion on products and services. We are very decentralized. When you have decentralization, you have a lot of different standards and different interpretation of requirements. And that's basically, it's almost like returning to mission. You have ROI, but also you have return to mission. What are we trying to do as an agency? So I think that's why human-centered design is very powerful.
So for the modernization effort for the Medicare payment system, we have put human-centered design sort of as the first thing that we have to do for any of our product lines. So when we take on a new product initiative, the first thing that we ask our stakeholders to answer is, who is the user, before we even take that product out of the backlog. What that's helping us to do is kind of find that balance of, yes, the CMS's primary end user is the beneficiary for whom we are paying out these claims, but the internal users, there's program integrity, there's innovation around payments, there's also the providers, there's a lot of hands that need to shake with each other to like actually make that payment happen, ultimately to provide care for that beneficiary. So finding that balance has been very critical. So internally, when we've set human-centered design, like Oki mentioned, it is a difficult culture change because a lot of times people are like, well, this is just the mainframe talking to the cloud. Where are the humans? But then just going back to it and saying, nope, this is not really a software problem. That software happens to solve the problem, but the problem is we are trying to solve for something. We either need data to go from one location to another, or we need to answer a question so that the provider can turn around and produce a prescription, give prior authorization for a wheelchair or an oxygen tank to a patient. So what is the actual human problem that we're trying to solve? And that's been working. It's been difficult, but it's also been helping to bring other factions within CMS to the table and be integrated. Another approach that we've taken is assigning product owners, as we shift to a product thinking mindset, is assign product owners not just within the IT organization, but also within the business organizations, kind of to spring that collaborative environment and also to really reinforce that this is a business problem. IT happens to solve the business problem, but really owning it.
So I did have a follow-up question. It almost seems like what everyone is talking over here is transformation. You're really looking to transform the way you're doing business right now. So that involves a lot of culture change as well. And that's one more layer of complexity. So how do you measure success then? When you're going through these, your blockchain, or you're looking at more of a product management and taking it through the entire life cycle. Do you have any metrics or measures that you're specifically kind of looking at? So okay, this is where we think we will define success as.
Well, I think it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. And I have an example that I can kind of talk about. I mentioned EPLC before, and everybody knows about the ATO process. And I think that these processes, as useful as they are, they kind of rival against that movement toward agility, that movement toward human-centered design. I mean, the intent of EPLC, which is like this governance process around the project and having milestones, is to ensure that human-centered design is actually taking place. That's essentially what it is. So it's almost like a watchdog after the fact. Baking all that stuff in, I think if you're looking for successes, I'll take the one project that I've already mentioned, the administrative data hub. I had, talk about talent and the depth of, the skills of the people working for you. I had someone who is long since retired come to me when I first arrived at my post, and in one sentence they asked for about $4 million and to do everything that we're doing with the administrative data hub. And they wanted me to go in front of my working capital fund board and ask for that money. And I thought, maybe there's some value in moving in this direction. So I took a crack at trying to write a justification, and we just couldn't answer the questions I knew would be coming. So I shifted and I went out and started talking to customers. And I think I talked to the right customers because one of my customers came to me with 66 use cases they had mined out by working with all of the different Optiv COs, or the COOs at all the different Optivs. So they weren't working with the CIOs, they were working with the CIOs' bosses. So this guy came to me, and it was like having the Trump card. No pun intended for Donald Trump. But it was like, this is going to go. I have 66 use cases to pair it against. So success in this case was saying that we went out with an RFP that, if satisfied, will address all 66 of those use cases. And we already have quantified the business value of solving those business problems. We were going to move forward with this whole big project worth the same amount of money with no business justification. Maybe there was a justification there that we all intuitively knew, but without actually having those customers and those use cases and those requirements and then mapping it out, I think you're working against yourself.
Yeah, the focus on objectives and success measures. Any good project starts with the prompt of how might we, right? So in health, it could be how might we reduce the incidence of cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease in the United States? Or it could be how might we enable secure communication for veterans interacting with the VA? Or it might be how might we help people to adopt healthier lifestyle behaviors in order to prevent disease. So it starts with that good prompt that helps us focus on really what is the ultimate objective, because all of us, right, can get mired in the details of what's the tech and the team and everything else. And so that's super important because some of our metrics aren't the best ones, and what gets measured gets paid attention to. So it's super important. And the other thing is, we're talking about bringing the people we serve to the table of innovation. Some good methods for that are qualitative research and ethnography, but also participatory design and co-creation. And that's in the research phase to understand mindset, but also in the ideation phase. We've established a Center for Health Experience Design where we're sort of knitting together collaborations with organizations across the health ecosystem, because the patient is trying to navigate this disparate ecosystem on their own. And if organizations across, pharma, payer, provider, government, nonprofit, health tech actually teamed up to serve the same patient better, we could accomplish some amazing things. So we're governing these multi-stakeholder projects and doing design challenges as well, but not the kind that you mentioned, really the kind that kind of prompts the greater community to come up with solutions. So it's sort of crowdsourced ideation. So one example of that is working with, in collaboration with HHS, we did a design challenge where we were redesigning medical bills. So short of legislating the design of medical bills, how do we make them easier to understand? Because as all of us know, they're sort of unfathomable. But also, how do we help people manage the financial aspect of health? They get EOBs, they get bills. How do they be prepared for surprise medical expenses, and how do we look after their financial well-being in that space? So for that, we had 80 teams respond, fantastic ideas, and many actual health systems have used this as a stimulus to innovation. So that's an excellent way to kind of work with, again, the community, but also the kind of greater ecosystem.
That's great. Thank you. So I think we're almost done. I was hoping to get a few more seconds for maybe a couple of questions, quick questions. Anyone? Nope. All right. So thank you again. Great panel. I did want to ask you on your final thoughts on, continuous collaboration, transparency, and working together between the federal agencies and the private sector. Where do you see it going, and what do you think are the next steps?
I'm very excited about the collaboration between industry as well as the government. I think in order to innovate and move forward, we need to work together and share ideas. And more importantly, I'm very excited about the leadership that we have in the federal government now. I think the federal CIO, Suzette Kent, is a visionary. I think she's evolving and embracing emerging tech. I think our new HSS CIO, my boss, Jose Arrieta, I call him the paradigm shifter because he's basically creating his own paradigm to shift and to kind of evolve with the big data paradigm shift. We have a lot of data. The past few years alone, we have created more data than our entire existence of mankind. So he's basically shifting the paradigm to answer that issue of big data. And I think Todd Simpson is going to be, I think he's going to be one of the leaders that's going to help the movement. I think he's great. I think he's embracing technology. He's embracing, he's embracing collaboration. He's embracing evolving. You become obsolete if you don't evolve. You have to evolve with the current state, and the current state is data, 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 data.
Yeah, my closing remarks on how we continue to collaborate is to be able to answer the question of what is the objective here, and tying it back to procurement, switching that from a statement of work of you shall do this and 150 different line items is not working. That's how we end up with these systems that work. In order to really be agile, it's a mindset, not a certification. So writing statement of objectives so you and the contractor teams can work together to solve a problem, and then answering the question once you are at the table of who is this a problem for, and solving with the users. I think those are going to be the keys to collaboration, no matter what we do. And then just real quick on the success metrics thing, this is new for everybody. This is uncharted territory. A lot of times what we've ended up doing, and it's worked, is actually defining failure instead of what success looks like. We're defining, saying that this is what failure looks like. We don't know what success looks like because we can't measure it yet, but if you know what failure looks like, you know not to go there.
So my closing remarks, I have a tendency of being a little bit cynical and jaded, but I'll say that I'm very optimistic about the future at HHS with the new leadership. For those of you who don't know Jose, he's always thinking outside of the box, but he cares very deeply, and I think that we have a real opportunity with him to do some great things, and I'm looking forward to being one of his, hopefully one of his right hands as he executes. So I would encourage this audience. He's very approachable. If you just flood him, it might not be the best thing, but we can't do what needs to happen without industry and without the industry partners. And when I come to events like this, one of the worst things is when I have to ask, did my vendor management office follow up with you? And no, I haven't heard back from them. So we have a lot of ground to still cover, to get things right. And especially in the CPO office, because we're a fledgling shop, a fledgling program, and we're just building the program out. But my closing remarks would be to continue to partner with us. Look for the RFPs that I'm putting out there, because there's lots of business hitting the streets. There's a BPA out there as well, and I'm always looking for strategic partners. And if you've got some presence at HHS, you definitely should come in and talk to me and start building a journey map with me. And that's the quickest way to bring that transparency forward.
Yeah, I'm going to share your optimism. We've seen some great things happen at scale, leveraging kind of a human-centered approach to innovation. And we're seeing even that approach evolve in exciting ways in terms of how we're now incorporating behavior science, scientific method, and psychology into greater level of understanding of the humans we're serving, but also figuring out how are we going to solve these problems, how are we going to overcome these obstacles, and really start to untangle these kind of wicked situations we're in. So kudos to all of you. Actually, I would like fall over if human-centered design was mentioned on a government panel probably 5 years ago. So I'm so super excited about that.
Absolutely, I agree. And I'm actually looking forward to catching up with all of y'all in maybe about 6 or 7 months and see how you're doing and what impact you're having on the community at large. So thank you very much. Look forward to meeting with you again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Megha, and thank you to our panelists for health acquisition. So our next panel is going to be focused on the General Services Administration. We're going to have Andrew Underhill, GovernmentCIO's Chief Technology Officer, lead this panel. He's going to be joined by panelists Omid Ghaffari Tabrizi, the Acquisitions Lead for the Centers of Excellence at GSA, Dan Pomeroy, the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Office of Information Integrity and Access with GSA as well. So could I have all three join? Welcome to the stage. For the people in the back area near the coffee and whatnot, we have plenty of seats here to the right. And just for that back area there, we are recording this, so if we could just keep the voices down in that area as well is going to be very important. So I'm going to hand it off here to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's bright. Nice.
So my name's Andrew Underhill. As Michael said, my role is CTO at GovernmentCIO. It's good to see some familiar faces here. We've got quite a following now. So, my role is to really go across the agencies and bring innovations, technology-wise, to the table, to stimulate that sharing of technology-based information. But we're not here to talk about that today. So, as far as GSA is concerned, I always like to understand the why. Why are you actually doing these things? Why are you trying to transform, etc. So I was wondering what initiatives, policy-based initiatives or government directives are driving change. Maybe start with you, Amit.
Sure.
Sorry, you didn't introduce yourself.
All right, introductions, okay.
Do that first.
Sure. So my name is Omid Ghaffari, acquisition lead over at COE. We are a team of 3 on the acquisition teams over at Centers of Excellence. So please recognize that when you send information to us, I will be the one reading it. So don't hesitate to send emails, grab us, whatever it may be. There really aren't that many of us.
Are the other 2 here?
The other 2 are not. They are in
No.
meetings covering for me because we are at a few agencies at this point. Yeah. So working with the team that we do have, all of us play our own individual key roles. And my role in particular is to handle a lot of kind of the pushing of the project management side. I have a technical background, so I translate some of the requirements into acquisition speak. And then since I was a contract attorney, I actually do help kind of draft and write up the procurements themselves. So kind of that jack-in-the-box role is what I really got to do to keep the ship moving.
Thank you. Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Pomeroy. I am from the General Services Administration. I work in the Office of Government-Wide Policy. There's an IT policy group that I head up. We manage the .gov registry for the United States. We help with federal identity credentialing policy, Section 508. We help adoption there. We work with federal agencies to improve their capital planning procedures through the ECIPIC program and through TBM. And we also work towards cloud adoption and data center optimization. So that's kind of a grab bag of different types of policies. They all intersect acquisition. And all of the different policies that come from the executive branch have a definite downstream impact on one or multiple of those programs. One of the things we do for identity credentialing is we produce the approved products list for PIV credentials and PACS, physical access control equipment. So there's a strong procurement intersect there where those pieces of technology have to be policy compliant in order for the companies to do business with the government. So there's a lot coming down the pike. We're excited to see the final version of Cloud Smart as it arrives, and also the new data center optimization initiative.
So, Amit, from your perspective, how are you supporting those initiatives that are coming your way?
So some of the initiatives that Dan was mentioning are very focused and specific. The identity credentialing, for example. But I think building some of those requirements into our procurements in general is one of the ways we support those. For example, standing up OCDO offices, right? Office of Chief Data Officer, something we're doing at HUD right now with COEs. Those are the ways we support some of those specifically focused initiatives. But I think this may be, I guess, a little bit backwards maybe, but one of the ways in which we support some of the initiatives related to modernization at COE, I think, is in essence trying to work ourselves out of a job. Centers of Excellence should not exist. If we're doing procurement properly, we shouldn't have legacy systems. We shouldn't be stuck with old 10, 20, 30-year-old systems that we're spending more money to maintain it and keep it up and running than we are improving it and coming up with those new features and things like that. So I think a lot of the things that the folks before us were saying as far as, working with the users themselves, really trying to build flexibility into the procurements, not going for those, I think someone said a couple hundred, line item contracts. Things like that really help push the envelope in serving the intent of those policies, much more so than perhaps the letter of the words, because as we all know, it takes a lot of time for things to happen in government. So flexibility is key. Building that into our procurements is, I think, the best way we can support any initiative, whether existing now or coming down the pipeline.
So anything to add on that, Dan, in terms of, what are you actually, you engaged with the COE effort, for example?
In a previous life, I was one of the directors of one of the COEs. Yeah, so we spent a lot of time working together in U.S. Department of Agriculture, which was Agency 1. The great thing about those types of initiatives is that it accelerates everyone's timeline. It forces us to not settle for the mediocre long time limits that we put on things. Oh, that's 4 months, that's 5 months, that's 7 months. When we really push down to brass tacks and say, what can we get done in the shortest amount of time, with the air cover to do it with senior leadership, which is a key component, and focused attention. And industry was extremely helpful. We had very short turnaround times for industry. I know Amit was directly involved with those for the different RFIs and for the different procurement steps that went out. So having that level of cooperation and goal setting to not settle for a long time frame was really, really exciting. And that was one of the best parts of working on the COEs.
So can you talk about any specific BPA activity or the you've helped, you feel is driving change within the GSA environment? And I know it's not just the GSA, right? Because you work with a lot of your customers, the outside agencies.
Absolutely, yeah. The BPA was the discovery BPA. That was the result of a lot of lessons learned from the work we did in phase 1, both at USDA and HUD. And I think it was also a wonderful example of how important working with industry to develop our solicitations really is. If you go back and look, so we put all of our procurement documents on GitHub. If you COE- whatever, look for it, you'll be able to find it on our GSA organization. And one of the things that you can do, go look at the Discovery BPA evaluation factors. The first one we put out in our draft RFQ, it was more or less a standard one, a couple of pages of technical volume and an oral interview, and let's see what happens. It was feedback we got from small businesses who are specialists in certain niche areas that we really wanted to get help in, information security, customer experience, change management, things like that, that said, your process is not going to let the true technical champions show how good they really are. The way you're doing it is the standard way where these big companies who have specialized in creating wonderful responses are going to just win the day, and you're going to be stuck with the same old, same old. So the feedback we got in that RFI, remember, it's 3 of us, we're sitting and reading it, right? We got that, it said to come up with that challenge question, which other folks before us were talking about. Come up with a scenario question, which focuses on the soft skills related to getting stakeholder buy-in. Because while we do have top cover at COEs, the agencies we go to work at may either A, not necessarily have that top cover, or B, may not have that bottom-up support. So by making sure that the vendors that we're putting on our BPA are actually attuned to some of those kind of political and personal relationship management issues that need to come up to make something stick when COE is long gone was an important factor. And only after going through those series of kind of let's see how good you are at doing your work questions did we get into the longer sort of response where we sit down and say, okay, let's really get into the details, the brass tacks of what this proposal is. So that entire evaluation process was built on industry feedback. If it weren't for folks in industry that are here right now responding to our RFI, emailing us, setting up meetings with us to talk to us and really give us your candid thoughts. I mean, if you beat around the bush, I'm not going to be able to read your mind, right? Tell me exactly what's working and what's not, because that's the only way we can really learn, right? So one of the things we have done, actually, the GSA COE Twitter handle has it kind of pinned at the top. We've put our templates online this week to say this is how we build out our documents, our market research, our acquisition plan, our RFQ are all there, and we want your feedback. Tell us if this works or not to get you, the best of the best, into the federal government ecosystem so you can start helping us truly innovate and keep modernization a normal part of the procurement process.
Yeah, that is fantastic, Brett. Yeah. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Congratulations. So from Dan, from your perspective, are you seeing any return on investment with these activities already?
Well, it's really incumbent upon, on the programmatic side, which I'm from now and I manage now, to stay abreast of what's going on the procurement side and where the innovations are. And so the GSA Senior Procurement Executive has put out a Procurement Innovation Resources Center online, gsa.gov/PIRC, P-I-R-C. It's a great resource to learn about commercial services openings, which is a non-FAR approach to purchasing activities, as well as the Small Business Innovation Research Program. There's new ways to buy, and the program people need to go up the learning curve. The procurement people inside the federal government need to help educate us to figure out where we can make ends meet. And on the industry side, you need to know which way the wind is blowing so you can tack with our general direction.
You know, if I could, I'm glad Dan brought up the PERC, because this is one thing I think is very unique at this point right now. It's only DoD and GSA that can utilize this non-FAR-based acquisition method. And I think for areas like artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, machine learning, some of these new technologies which have implications not only on the battlefield but also on the home front, it's very important to allow these vendors to get into both military and civilian side of government procurement to really kind of push these technologies forward for human-centered, user-centered, citizen-facing work, as well as just general defending our nation against whatever threats that may, Hondo is helping us deal with all around the world. I think it's very important to get that just general flood of knowledge and resources in all sides of government procurement and all sides of government technology to really integrate these systems with one another.
So in this audience, there's normally a lot of technology startup or emerging technologies being represented here. Could you walk us through like a three-step process where they can engage? And you mentioned GitHub. Is it as simple as just registering with GitHub? Or are there other hoops you need to jump through before you get to that stage?
So to give us feedback, GitHub is a great place no matter whether you're involved in the government marketplace or not. I mean, you don't even need an account. It's public. I think github.com/GSA/COE-acquisitions, that's a great place to kind of start to find what we're doing. That's just general feedback, right? Even if you're not involved, I want to hear best practices in industry about how you go about procuring some of these new technologies. I mean, some of these Fortune 500 companies, I think someone was mentioning, we're more or less the same bureaucracy-wise. They've already done the things we're trying to do. So let's learn from them how they bought it and how they got it done right.
You're assuming commercial industry is better. No, not always. But.
Well, there's lots of things to learn from industry, but at the end of the day, we do have our own unique world. I mean, the same way you go and work with any of those companies, they're going to have their own unique processes that work for them. So that's definitely the first place to start, to just see how we're doing the buying. The next thing would be to get yourself in the GSA marketplace. Fastlane for Schedule 70 is probably going to be one of the quicker ways. Springboard, I think, as well, is another great way to kind of jump head first and really fast track your entry into the government marketplace. And then after that, it's really just spend as much time as you can going to events like these and finding out where the winds are blowing in terms of just general government procurement, so you can kind of align yourself to providing those solutions that government not only wants, but needs and doesn't know that they need, right? That's the statement of objectives talk from right before us. That is what we really kind of emphasize at COE as well, because when you're developing technology, you have no idea what's going to come up, especially on an agency-wide scale, when you start to find these shadow pockets of IT, these different organizations that found something that worked for them and they don't want to kind of blow their cover by sharing it with everyone else and really kind of making it too big to actually work well. So you find little pockets all throughout a government agency once you start work that you never expected, so you have to be able to react to that. So if you, as a government partner, you've done the GitHub and seen how we're buying, you've got yourself on, one of the GWACs, and now you're sitting down and having conversations, again, be candid, be upfront, tell people what works and what doesn't, because there's no better way to learn than to hear from folks on the other side of the table.
Dan, from your perspective, do you agree wholeheartedly with this, or do you think there's an element of, this is a great shiny new toy, but is it going to be adopted by the agencies and be allowed to be matured?
I would never disagree with Omid. Absolutely. I do agree. And I'm in the policy business. In the policy business, we're trying to make sure that requirements and statements of objectives and statements of work go out well, and that they're policy compliant, that agencies are not only aware of their policy responsibilities, but also bake those into the procurements. And so what we've developed are plain language assessment tools to look at what gets posted online, to understand how many RFQs are, let's say we're scanning for 508 verbiage or something along those lines. That way we can circle back with agencies and look for ways to help them get the requirements compliant, not just compliant, but also forward-leaning into the future.
So is that reduce the cycle time or improve quality? What was the objective, going to the objectives of that?
Right, that's the hope. Usually if we see something go out, you can't get into a time machine and tap the contracting officer on the shoulder and say, hey, if you could add a paragraph here, it's going to be great. But it's our job to help educate agencies, procurement officials, and program people that are approving these documents before they go out to make sure that they're in the best shape they can.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left. I'd like to open up some questions from the audience here. We ran out of time on the previous 2 panels, and I know there's some great questions normally come forward. Anybody? Is there a microphone? Yeah.
I'm not actually very loud, so that's helpful. Jackie Myers, I'm with Booz Allen, and one of the things that we're really focused on, I know there's a Center of Excellence for, is customer experience. And a limitation from a procurement perspective is that everything happens in agency silos. So even though the same customer for the government might need Medicare and Social Security and HUD benefits, it's happening through the silos. Are there any efforts to bring that together so there can be a cross-agency customer experience?
Oh, if only. That would be great. What a fantastic idea. No, I think customer experience through this process and through this administration has raised a new level of priority. Agencies are setting up their individual customer experience officers. We have one at GSA. She's doing a marvelous job. The silos are not just agency by agency, they're internal, right? And so a lot of what we're doing is getting our own houses in order, and I think that could be the right evolutionary step to have a better customer experience for the taxpayer, for the American public as they interface. But I know that as GSA has leaned forward into this, the cross collaboration, especially when we look at what the 21st Century Idea Act has asked us to do even with our web presence, and having the CXO, the Customer Experience Officer, take a lead in that space and saying, our web presence needs to be of one voice in GSA, and how can we, as an orchestra, all play our instruments to harmonize with each other, I think is great. And so I'm bullish on that notion. Definitely, I think we're pointed in the right way.
I think what we're doing with COE efforts is hopefully getting us to that, where we're centralizing a lot of the knowledge we're gaining from the contractor teams that have helped us at USDA, at HUD, now are going to help us with OPM and all the future agencies. All the knowledge we're gleaning from folks that have worked with us is being deposited, in essence, in the government knowledge database. So when we go to the next agency, we are a step ahead because of the things we've learned from industry, and we're able to kind of push that envelope further every single time we do it. And then just even on a practical level, one of the things that we have done in an attempt to kind of make it more explicit that breaking down these silos is required is put a section in our RFQs. In the HUD Phase 2 buys, Section 1.4 literally has bullet points that explains how you have to work with other centers and other teams within that agency itself as kind of our first steps to say, hey, this isn't implicit, this is an explicit requirement. Break these silos down. There's no other way to do it other than tell you it's required, and you're not going to get paid unless you do it, more or less, right? So it incentivizes that kind of collaboration across teams internally and externally.
Yeah, to help keep the COE materials fresh as well if it's enforced, right? I think one of the dangers of COE artifacts is they're collected and collected from wherever.
Yeah. They find a digital shelf someplace where they collect digital dust, right?
Electronics record management is moving the binders from the shelves to the cloud, right? But no, I think that one of the big hopes of what we are doing with COE is to keep our technology fresh. So this is actually the Discovery BPA has a 3-year period of performance rather than a 5 or more, because we want to make sure our industry partners, A, refresh their own solution offerings, and B, keep those prices competitive, because you understand, hey, I could be swapped out. They aren't going to have me on board long enough to get locked into me. I really have to do a good job. So that's something that we need to do for the American citizen, right? And if you really are as good as you claim to be, your work should speak for itself, so you shouldn't be afraid of this, right? And we want to make sure we do this in a friendly way, which is why we want the collaboration across industry, why we are putting all of our documentation out in the open, and that indefinite RFI is what we're calling it. It's a Google form on our GitHub repo, and we will never shut it down. Just throw us any thoughts you have based on the templates you see there, and that's how we're going to improve our work from buy to buy, because the procurement packages are our product, right? This is our product on the acquisition side. Tech folks develop code, Navy builds nuclear submarines, we put out procurement packages.
Yeah, so with 3 persons, 11 million products, and I hope you have some AI on the background there.
Yeah. Well, it's the open sourcing our knowledge, right? I mean, we can't do this without cooperation, collaboration. So we were forced to use GitHub in essence, because we need other folks' help. We don't have the resources, right? We're as lean of a startup as you can get in essence.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think we're out of time. Any final question that can be answered really quickly? Or if not, catch up with these 2 folks after this event. I'm sure you'll be hanging around. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much.
Now is take a quick 10-minute break. So if everybody, there are bathrooms there in the back. We'll also have coffee and some food as well. But just want to emphasize this is going to be a quick 10-minute break because we have 2 panels and a fireside chat with Leslie Field to finish up with here. So we have some great content. So we want to get kicked off as close to 10:15 as possible. But for those that do need to use the bathroom, if you go the way that you came in, it will be right before it's kind of the food there if you turn right there. Okay? Also, if the sun does come out, we do have sunglasses back there, complimentary sunglasses, especially for those who might be sitting over here. Might be important. All right, see everybody in 10. Thank you. All right. All right, we're going to kick back off here. All right, well, thank you very much for coming back and joining us. Our next panel is going to be the Fast Tracking Acquisition panel. And this is one of my favorite panels, not to say anything negative about the other ones, but this is one of the ones that I've been most excited about because we've been able to put together a great group of talent here and some of the more exciting agencies throughout government working on the theme that we're really trying to attack here is really bringing in the best in breed technologies to the government. So without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists. From left to right, we have Megha Metzger, founder and CEO of Decode. I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little bit in terms of their program, but I'm going to start with the names, all right? All right, so we have Megha Metzger from the left, founder and CEO of Decode. In the middle, we have Ashley Owens, Director of Acquisition for 18F at GSA. And then Tracy Walker, Director of Digital Service Procurement at the U.S. Digital Service. So why don't we start with you, Tracy? Could you start off and talk a little bit about your role over at USDS and how it goes?
Sure, no problem. So I've been a contracting officer in the government for many years now, and after President Obama decided to create U.S. Digital Service, one of the big things they wanted to make sure that was included in that was not just bringing in people who could fix the tech, but also people who could fix the acquisition piece of it, which I know, TTS had that same thought as well. And so over the past 5 years now, we're about to turn 5, which is pretty awesome. We've done a lot in the realm of doing projects and showing what can be done with rapid acquisition, getting things to delivery, showing how we can bring in companies that know how to do this in industry and saying, okay, we're going to help you get through the barriers of entry to government. So bringing in, new, hungry, young companies. And then also workforce training. And that's been one of the things that I've been really focusing on over the past several years is how do we kind of reskill the workforce into understanding what this is. And so last year, we launched and created the FACSI Digital Service Certificate for contracting officers, which basically establishes a specialization for contracting officers in this field. So one of the things we're looking at is like, if you're a buyer and you don't know your industry, how can you be that effective? If you don't know how to write a contract to do agile software development or user-centered design, you're trying to kind of force everything back into the traditional government model, you're going to see problems and it's not going to be very successful. So one of the things we're saying, instead of trying to, go after the laws, the policies, the regulations, we want to teach people that the flexibilities that exist in the federal regulations already are there and how to use them and become champions for that change to kind of really bring that forward. So that was launched last year, and we have roughly around 200 people graduating by the end of this year with 11 different cohorts. So you're going to see a huge influx, hopefully, of specialists that know how to do these kinds of procurements. And the next thing we're tackling right now is product ownership and product management thinking for the other side of the contract. Once you've awarded it, you have to have people that understand how to administer and actually get the products delivered. And so product thinking and bringing that to the government, the acquisition workforce. So that's where we're at right now.
Okay. Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley Owens. Again, I'm the Director of Acquisition at 18F. I, like Tracy, was a contracting officer prior, and I didn't know what was happening. I just know 5 years later, I was getting CD-ROMs and not systems. And I'm like, I got to fix this. So I came over to TTS as a procurement analyst thinking like, oh, it must be the policy. And then fast forward, I've fully drank the Kool-Aid on Agile, all things Agile. And so essentially that's my role is I take the concepts of Agile and the values of Scrum and apply it to the acquisition process. And we promote open source, open API, and human-centered design. But it's human-centered design in terms of your acquisition products. Thinking about your customers in a different way, thinking about how you collaborate with industry in a different way. I can't stress enough how Agile is a cultural shift, and the government is really large. And so it makes change hard, but I'm here to break the wheel and make better procurements that will make all citizens' lives better, which is essentially like TTS's overall mission.
Okay, Megan.
Awesome. Well, good morning or afternoon. I'm not sure where we are right now. So like you said, I'm the CEO of Decode, and we are a nice complement to the other side of the equation from the two other speakers here this morning. So we have one mission, and that is how do we help the government get access to better emerging technologies and capabilities so we can be better at our missions, whether that's supporting our citizens or making our soldiers safer. And so we've really become kind of this central point for the entire community of tech, government, and the partner ecosystem to connect. And we do that through two things. So one, we run an acceleration program for technologies that are looking to understand the government market. It's really hard. I think we all know that. And a lot of it is how do they navigate procurement from the other side is a big piece of it. And we run them around different topics. We've done artificial intelligence as a program and a cohort. We're about to launch space. We're doing health IT. And we've accelerated 70 technologies to date. And they're actually across, I think, 52 different programs and agencies right now, which is really fantastic. So there's definitely, when you bring all of this together, and what we'll talk about today, there's definitely results that can happen. The other side of that is we run a training program for government leaders, and it's around the culture and how do you navigate the bureaucracy. So I completely echo what she said, which is everything that we need is there, whether it's procurement in the FAR and some of the more innovative acquisition methodologies that we can use. And if we understand how to kind of do bureaucracy jiu-jitsu, then we can get the solutions that we need in the door. So we've trained 200 leaders so far this year, and we have a whole boatload coming up, and that will help. And the perspective that we bring to that training is we know what the pain is like from the other side, from the technology companies, so we can help also the government empathize on the outputs of what comes out in a procurement and the effects that has on the technologies.
All right, well, wonderful. See, like I said, just a great range of backgrounds and experiences for both on the government side and then having Megan's perspective too of working with some of those companies and getting their perspectives of what's working and what's not. So I guess to start the conversation, I really thought it would be great to talk a little bit about some of the trends that you guys have seen over the past 5 years. It seems like there have been quite a few new programs that have been or initiatives that have come forward. So I was wondering if we could start with you, Tracy, and just some of the trends that you've seen within that acquisition process, especially when it comes to bringing aboard some of these new technologies within government agencies.
I think one of the biggest trends that I've seen right now is the fact that acquisitions are becoming much faster for tech. Instead of thinking that you have to go through the 9-10 month process, year process, and I know this is echoed by the 18F, but we're looking at more modular, smaller contracts which carry less risk. But then also doing way more, call it the Missouri thing, which is show me versus tell me. Can say that. Yeah. But basically the idea that you're doing design challenges or coding challenges, and we're getting away from the 100-page PWSs that is supposed to be a good indicator of whether or not you're going to be successful on a project, and just having conversations with companies that we want to work with and say that this is, completely allowed to start this trust factor building now. And I think that's another thing, too, that we're seeing a lot of, is that the teams coming together and saying we are all one team and we're trying to serve an end user that may have really hard problems getting some service from the government. So we need to stop all the infighting and figure out how do we make that person's life easier in navigating their own government systems that they have to do. So seeing a lot more of those trends.
Okay. Ashley?
I would say on one side, some things haven't changed, but it's because we have habits, right? And we're used to traditional contracting. But I feel like now everyone at least knows the word agile or has some kind of idea what it is. And curiosity makes you want to know more, which is always a good thing. At 18F, what we found is that training along with pairing. So at 18F, we do acquisition consulting, we do assisted acquisition, but the idea is once you teach somebody a concept, also showing a contracting officer the how is how you really create change in the agile space. And I think the secretary in the Fireside Chat talked about this, how the culture change in agile requires a humility reset, right? And so we have to do introspective thinking and retrospectives, if you want to talk about an agile word. And that is what's going to lead to better procurements. Another trend is because of this introspection, more agencies are using non-traditional methods of reaching vendors. So we post everything in GitHub. All of our partners post everything in GitHub, and it's again that Scrum value of openness. If we've done an RFQ good for software development, why not share it with the world? And so some other office can pick that up and be able to use it. So overall, I would say the trend I see the most is that more people have an appetite for Agile, and that makes my heart happy.
That's good.
Yeah, I think the programs that these women work on are great indicators of the trends that are going on. You know, we started, Decode started about 3.5 years ago, and at that point, you know, the DoD hadn't moved out to Silicon Valley yet, and that's one of the major trends that I've noticed is not only are we trying to get there faster through the means that they spoke about, but the realization that the market research that we do is not a check in the box for a FAR requirement. That, you know, we can't hand some requirements over to our contracting staff and expect them to identify artificial intelligence solutions. You know, we have to do tech scouting. We have to reach them in a different way because a lot of the vendors that we want in the government are not reading FBO.gov. Right? So I've seen a big uptick, whether it's the Air Force or DHS. I mean, almost every agency are moving out to Silicon Valley and Austin and Boston and trying to hold more challenges and reach a different population.
Okay.
I also see a disruption from the industry side as well, where you kind of have the, you know, prior to, you know, past 5 years, you have the traditional industry day, you have the traditional kind of, we're going to tell you our requirements, you're going to tell us kind of what you think it should be doing. And we're seeing that happen a lot earlier in the process. And if it is kind of more that traditional way, we're seeing a lot more companies speaking up and saying, yeah, you put all this stuff in the RFQ and that kind of breaks the Agile process. That's not going to work for us. And, you know, we really don't want to, you know, necessarily bid on this because of the fact that we can just see that this is going to be a problem. So standing up and saying like, you know, there are the challenges to this and we're going to be the kind of company that like, we would rather not get the business than to see it not work out. And so I see a lot of courage and bravery kind of coming from the industry in this space saying, yeah, kind of government, you got to fix this stuff. We're not ready. You're not ready for this yet. So let's get it together, you know, to kind of come together to, you know, put in that collaboration and, you know, start small and then figure out how do you scale bigger.
Well, you mentioned process, and that was going to be the next question, is some of the changes that have occurred within the acquisition process, specifically the way proposals are being submitted. So we've seen some of the trends where instead of the traditional paper proposal response to the RFP, you know, we've seen some hackathons as well as some demos. I was wondering if the three of you could talk a little bit about how has that been effective, and what are some of the pros and cons to that so far?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think the fact that we're doing something different is fantastic because this isn't just a thing that's nice to do. This is an absolute necessity that we figure this out because the technologies that we're talking about on stage are not going to respond to a 100-page RFP because I'm just going to go sell to Capital One instead or another market. So they're going to avoid the government altogether, and we're going to really miss the wave of private sector technologies that could be here. And I've seen a lot of success come out of things like the challenges and the prizes. Megan Metzger's personal soapbox is sometimes we do them for more of the marketing and the fanfare to say that we did a challenge and a prize, but that's not the point. The point is to do something with the outcome of that. So if we're going to run a challenge, Air Force is a great example. They ran their challenge around the new generation of helmets, and they actually got really interesting solutions in and had a plan to do prototyping work following on. So if you can use the challenge as more of that down select into maybe a FAR procurement, then you're doing something. But if you're doing a challenge just to say, we did a challenge and it was innovative, then I think we've missed the boat a little bit.
Okay. Ashley?
I want to say get out of my head. I feel the same way. Again, applying agile principles to acquisition, if you look at your evaluation criteria in a human-centered way, evaluation criteria should mimic the landscape in which the vendor is going to operate. So if you are with a defense, doing a defense contract, and you will have to ship code in real time under very extreme conditions, yeah, give them a 4-hour challenge, because that might be real. I don't know. But if they're going to have a year to build code, just tell them, send you what they built. Show me what you built. There's nothing wrong with similar experience. You don't have to use the traditional past performance evaluation criteria. So I think it's about looking at evaluation criteria from that standpoint. Also, using the phased approach, where, to Megan's point, there's not so much volume up front. We did this with Centers of Excellence. We had the challenge first. They had 2 days to respond to the challenge. That was the first cut. And then there was another phase, and both were only half pages long. And so by the time you got to the third phase, vendors didn't have to waste all of, I think it's like around $10,000 a page sometimes to write a proposal. But you get to the third phase, and if you're out, you didn't have to waste that money writing all those pages. And if you're in, you still only had 10 pages to submit. So I think it's, again, meeting industry where they are, and then on our side, thinking about our evaluation criteria in a more human-centered way.
Yeah, I think we've taken the phased approach to heart as well at the U.S. Digital Service. Doing the tell me kind of what you're going to do. We'll see if we want to come and see it and actually meet you, and then see what you can do for us. And a lot of times, though, we have had some lessons learned around this, which is, be thoughtful about what kind of challenge you're going to make the companies run. If it is going to be a 4-hour challenge, is that really what you want to see? And if at the end of that, your requirement is to build an MVP or a prototype within those 4 hours, are you actually evaluating what you need to know whether or not that contractor is going to be successful on your contract, or can they just run a fire drill in 4 hours? And, we have to make sure that agencies are very thoughtful about that, to say, okay, we did a challenge. We don't want that to become the next new thing, or a co-challenge or design challenge that becomes the next thing that you've rubber stamped and you aren't actually really thinking about what that is. But also having the technical evaluators that have the skill level that's commensurate with the kind of challenge you're actually going to put out. So if you put out code challenges and you don't have anybody that can understand how to read and evaluate code, don't do a code challenge. If you have a design challenge and you're just really wanting to know the process of it, don't be worried about whether or not they're doing the things exactly the way you would do them as a designer, but are they getting to the point and to the end result? So having also one of the things we recommend is that if you are going to do a challenge, that your technical evaluation team or some team within your government side can actually execute the challenge you're asking them to do before you put it out there. So, making sure that it's feasible to get that done is one of the big things.
Go ahead,
Megha. Beyond challenges, there are some really fantastic acquisition vehicles that we can use now to address this requirements problem, because what we still see happening quite a bit is we are buying software and these emerging capabilities the same way that we're buying an airplane, and it's down to spec. And what we unintentionally do is block innovation that way, because we put a spec in there that we thought was important, and a company might solve your problem a completely different way, but now they can't bid because they're going to be non-compliant. But we can look at things like the CXO from GSA, or BAAs or OTAs, that will allow you to get a quick synopsis. If it's interesting enough, then you can discuss what the actual RFP and the requirements should look like with the vendors, so that you're more informed on what a solution could look like, instead of making a guess and kind of blocking innovation that way.
Okay, interesting. So Tracy, you made a comment earlier about micro purchases and some of the things that USDS is working with that. Could you talk a little bit more about that, go into a few more details about how you mentioned it takes away some of the risk?
Yeah, so one of the cool things that came out over the past year in the NDAA that got applied to everyone is the fact that the micro purchase level got raised from $3,500 to $10,000. That's a huge jump, and we really pushed for that. Helped OFPP to say well, what does that give you? What leverage does that give you? Well, one, you can go buy a license and test it out within your own, organization to say, okay, does this work, as opposed to having to do market research solely without touching products. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of in a trend, some of the graduates from the DITAP program in VA are using it to actually run small mini competitions through GitHub for come and build an API or give us an API strategy. And they're doing basically something that's like a 2-week sprint that they pay about $10,000 for. And so they get to have the discussion discovery from industry before they actually have to make the full requirements or go back for a full acquisition. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of companies kind of looking at that and saying, how can I create micro consulting opportunities so that you can have a 2 or 3 day session with us? And in the sense, you know, in regular commercial industry, you just call a company in and be like, okay, here's our problem, tell us what to do for it. And that company that was trying to get that business would look at that and be like, I'm not going to charge you for that. Well, you know, we can't do that in government. So using micro purchase threshold and that authority now can help us really get to have these conversations with companies to help us define our requirements, not to the sense of like putting in, like you said, the elements that have to be there, but understanding what is the possibility in the market and what are innovative ideas that we could potentially bring in, and being able to pay a fair market value with it, but at the same time being able to use the micro purchase threshold, which is not something controlled by acquisition shops by itself. A lot of program offices have the authority to use the micro purchase card. So seeing program offices being able to get involved in this from that stage is really good as well.
Megan, have you seen that at any other agencies that you guys have worked with?
Yeah, I mean, we see a big uptake in I'm a fan of the micro consulting. I mean, we can hire interns and build an entire app in a week. You know, there's so much that we can do for so much less money, and I think it really opens a lot of doors to get a license, try something quickly, and test it out.
Well, and it also goes to the companies that haven't done the that don't necessarily want to go through SAM or get the DUNS number and all that stuff. You can do the micro purchase, consulting, micro purchasing without having to go through all those government hoops to just start working with the government too.
And the best thing about micro purchase is it's like true to agile that you're starting small and iterating out. The cap forces you to stay small, for one, and it gives small business a foot in the door. You know, that's going to be appetizing to any small business. $10,000. I mean, that's a way for me to show the government and get some experience under my belt for the next bigger contract that I try to go bid for.
Okay. So, Ashley, I'm going to go back to you for something that you brought up during kind of our preparatory call, talking a little bit about infrastructure as a service is something that you've seen quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that applies within 18F and GSA?
Yeah, I feel like cloud buying is like one of the biggest things we get asked about. I mean, everybody's migrating to the cloud. Where is the cloud? Yeah, right.
So high up.
Right. We have stickers that literally say cloud, or they're just a computer somewhere else. But a lot of you hear things, right? And a part of agile again is not starting with a solution. So your problem may be indeed that you're migrating to the cloud, but it doesn't mean that infrastructure as a service is automatically your solution. Maybe platform as a service is your solution. Maybe something like, shameless plug, cloud.gov is your solution. But it's about 1102s thinking about their job in a different way. I consider 1102s the tip of the spear in IT modernization. Like the choices we make each fiscal year transcend for years to come. And you need to ask certain questions like, what kind of applications are we trying to move to the cloud? Does it require a lot of configuration? What kind of setup does our organization have? Do we have all the governance in place? Do we have all the security controls in place? And asking those kinds of questions will determine if infrastructure as a service or platform as a service is the best for you, or maybe some combination of both. And so that's kind of what we promote at 18F in the space of cloud buying.
Okay. Have you seen any of that at USDS so far?
Well, I mean, I think we've used cloud.gov, definitely. But absolutely, like, modern technology stack and the whole, like, decisions that go into that is one of the big things that we make as kind of a prerequisite to going into work with any agency. We see a lot of legacy systems that are out there, and so we have to help agencies figure out how are they going to make that migration and how are they going to come up to something that is, capable of handling all of the data and all of the records and everything like that. So, we definitely see a lot of the trends. We don't necessarily, prescribe one way or another which way you should go, because it is that question of what works best within your environment. But from pretty much all of our projects that we've worked on, we've increased the ability for the agency either to get on the cloud or to establish a cloud for the first time, or infrastructure or whatever, as a service that they potentially get, and then making the decision of what open source software to kind of put on top of that and how to build that out is kind of our traditional play that we put in.
Okay. Well, speed has been a theme that's come up multiple times. Secretary Geurts talked a lot about it as the Navy is being rigged for speed. So I want to bring up that topic. What are some of the different fast-tracking strategies that you've seen within acquisition? This is a question for all three of you, that have proved successful. And then I'll flip it too. What have been some that you've seen that haven't worked as well? I'll start with you, Tracy.
Okay. So one of the things we've worked on at the U.S. Digital Service is we worked with the Small Business Administration to come up with a digital service 8A initiative. And you can find out more about that on the techfarhub.cio.gov. And basically what that is, the 8A program is fantastic for government because it allows you to have a single source award with a developing business for up to $4 million, which is perfect in the low risk environment of getting started with digital service in a safe way without busting the ceiling or making it too big for what you can handle with the skill sets that you have. And so what that allows is that we've put out 3 statements of objectives out there really around learning the process, selecting the technology that would work best for you, and then building a digital MVP. So this is really geared toward agencies that have not really gone into this. The cool thing is we worked with an agency recently, last February. They were able to do an acquisition from beginning until end using this 8A program in basically 3 weeks from concept of doing we picked the company, did a kind of a vendor day of having them come in, kind of demonstrate a little bit, selected the company, and then had the ink on the contract signed, basically 3 weeks later. And then this was in February, and in May of 2018, they launched their first product live, their first MVP live. So being able to show an agency, and this was a very large program as well, but being able to show an agency that they could actually get something done from an acquisition standpoint to actually seeing something live in less than 6 months they were just like, this doesn't happen here. And so it's really cool to see those trends happening.
Yeah. Ashley?
Yeah, this is why my tagline is making procurement joyful, because it's like exciting when you get things like fast and get it done.
I haven't heard the word joyful yet.
Yeah,
so I appreciate
literally
that.
every time I say making procurement joyful, like the whole room laughs. But one day it's gonna be like just a thing. We use a lot of workshopping. Again, in the agile space, collaboration is a big thing. And I've literally sat with clients, and in 3 days we had a draft RFQ. Unheard of, right? Like usually to put out a draft RFQ takes weeks. But when you've already validated your problem space through the proper discovery, let's say processes, procedures, since it's government, you know what your problem is, and so it's easier to write this RFQ that's going out to the world. And also you're not, to Tracy's point, taking 9 months to write requirements because you're trusting the industry to give you the solution. All we need to say is our objectives. So that's helping the government get out to the market faster. And then in terms of evaluation, again, the phased approach, we typically see from start to finish in a competitive environment. So not sole source, but a 90-day turnaround from start to finish. That's still a big deal in government. And the last thing I'll say is in the post-award environment, which to me becomes the most important part, in Agile, because pre-award becomes really easy because you're not trying to write everything. You're trusting the industry to give you a solution. And so the post-award environment, when you're getting code delivered every 2 weeks, that's pretty fast. It's better than writing a waterfall contract and then waiting 5 years to see a thing that you have to plan change management, you have to plan governance. There's all these other things you have to plan on top of the thing that's probably going to have a million bugs when it comes out because it didn't have that human-centered design piece that you've got to insert in. So I think, again, applying Agile to all parts of acquisition just inherently gives us speed.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I've seen that I'm a big fan of. I actually really like the DHS Silicon Valley innovation programs methodology, especially for technologies that are coming in. So up front, they say it is X number of phases for X number of dollars, and it creates a predictability because on the commercial side, if you're a private sector and you're the salesperson coming into the government and you have to go report what your pipeline looks like in government, it's really hard. Like, how's that coming? I don't know. When will it be awarded? No clue. Do you have competition? Probably. It's really difficult and you lose your job. So it is predictable, but what that also allows them to do is in the phases, prove out in an agile fashion whether or not the technology worked. And if it does, then you move it to the next phase, and you're testing multiple types of technology against the same problem set. So we're not making a huge award and putting all of our eggs in one basket with a company. So I think it works well on both sides. I've seen some programs actually that do take contracting staff on ride-alongs so they can actually understand and be connected to the mission, and it's incredible how impactful that is, because otherwise we have mounds of paper as contracting folks that we have to get through by the end of the year, and it's much easier for us to understand what you're looking for if we've seen and lived the problem that you have. The last one I would mention is the way that the Air Force has revamped the SBIR program is really fascinating. So they have an open topic for dual-use technologies, so specifically looking for technology that was built for private sector to come back into the government, and it's an open invitation. So anyone can submit an SBIR proposal under the topic, and then they set aside a bucket of funds, and the phase one, which is usually that discovery phase, is actually intended for them to go find a customer. Okay. So rather than having to know exactly what the requirements are and what they're trying to solve, they then get to go explore different offices across the Air Force and find someone that wants the tech they have and execute the SBIR that way. And one of our companies said it restored their faith in government contracting.
Okay, that's excellent.
And you asked about a con. The only con I see is you can't move so fast that you forsake processes or compliance, right? Because for a while that was a stigma around agile. It was like, oh, if it's agile, so it must not be compliant, or if there's not all of this paperwork, how do we know that all of the things have been checked? And so it's about speed, but also keeping in mind that this is still the government, and there are still things that we need to have in place.
Okay.
But I would say the last thing is failing to plan for the follow-on. So in a lot of times we're moving fast and we've made these awards quickly and we're getting to prototype, and then we stop and we restart this 2-year process to get to the actual production contract. And so you have to think about that day one.
Yeah.
So you're not getting to the end of it and then realizing you need an acquisition strategy.
Okay. So we're just about out of time here, but I wanted to close and ask all three of you a question. What's next? So we talked a lot about some of the trends that have happened over the past 5 years. What's something that you see as over the horizon and maybe taking the government to that next level when it comes to introducing new technologies to agencies?
Well, like I kind of mentioned before, really trying to make a push to getting everyone in government have a product thinking kind of mindset as opposed to a project-based thinking mindset, and really understanding that this is how technology is built in industry and how much can we bring of that into the government without having to recreate our own government version of what that looks like. And so, a lot of the stuff that we're working on aligns to the CAP goals with IT modernization and reskilling the workforce. So I think that we'll see more of that coming out, because the model with USDS is that, and 18F is that we, hire and bring in engineers, product managers, and design, user-centered design experts, because we just don't have that skill set within the government. Well, what would it look like in the government if we had those skill sets? And then we're able to do and outsource the remainder of that to the companies that we need to work with. I think that whole picture provides a much brighter future for where we are, and that really just comes up with just updating skills that we haven't had the opportunity to do in the government.
Okay, great. Ashley?
I don't know if this is next, but I hope it's next. And I think that's openness. I'm really big on open source code and open APIs. Budgets are shrinking every fiscal year. The budgets that do come down, 80% of that budget is usually to keep patching up the old bad thing, and there's not really that much money to start the new thing. So those departments or entities that are like forward-looking and forward-thinking, when they're building these systems and they're putting this code out in the open, some other agency that has a very similar mission to you is able to pick it up, and they're able to start at a cheaper price. Because something already existed. And the thing about government is I know a lot of people are like, well, all of your missions kind of sound the same. Yeah, we do a lot of the same things. Everybody writes contracts. Everybody does grants. But everybody's mission has a nuance, which requires that customization. So what I really hope is next is that more organizations start building open systems that everyone will be able to adopt. And then more small businesses are maybe able to come to the table more large businesses are able to shape technologies and how we produce our work and how citizens receive their benefits through websites, through systems. It's my hope that once we create this culture of openness, it also breaks down those barriers between government and industry, and we start working in like a truly collaborative way, because the technical debt is high, and we can only pay it down together.
Okay, Megha?
Mine's kind of continuation from that thread. Maybe it's a hope and a dream, but we do now that we're thinking big and starting to act small and more incrementally, which I think really is fantastic. And I think what that will ultimately do is change the expectations that we have as the government on our existing contracting staff and the incumbent community, because we need to start behaving differently and also coming along for the ride of thinking big and acting small. I also see a big shift from the butts in seats to pulling in products from the private sector instead of building everything from scratch, so that we can get there faster instead of recreating the wheel every time. So I think we'll continue to see that shift.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all three of you for sharing a few of those ideas. Thank you.
All right. So our next panel, thank you very much, ladies. Appreciate it. So our next panel is going to be focused on strategic sourcing, which is a very common topic in industry and making its way into government. So I'd like to introduce to the stage Kristen Gill. She's our Chief Delivery Officer here at GovernmentCIO, and she will be moderating the panel. She will be joined by panelist Michael Conroy. He's the Deputy Director for Strategic Sourcing Acquisition Division of NOAA. And Johnston Williamson, Director, Engineering Service, Office of Procurement, Acquisition, and Logistics at Veterans Affairs. Thank you all three, and I will let you take it away here. Kristen.
Can you hear me? All right, thank you, Mike, very much. I'm very excited to be here at this event talking about a topic that I've really built my career on, and that's acquisition, and specifically acquisition innovation, which I'm very passionate about. So thank you, JW and Mike, for joining us this morning to talk about the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative and the future of government contracting. So for those of you in the audience that don't know, the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative is a government-wide coalition of agencies that's committed to improving acquisition processes, mostly by adopting industry best practices, moving towards strategic sourcing, and really moving away from the siloed agency-specific acquisitions. And so with us today, we have JW and Mike, who have really built their careers on improving acquisition and are now charged with moving towards strategic sourcing at their respective agencies. So with that, I'll go into an introduction of the panelists. So JW, you and I have worked together for several years during my tenure at the VA and before that the Army. And you've recently taken a new job at the Office of Strategic Sourcing with the VA. So if you could, in your intro, just kind of give us a background of your career path and really what led you to this new position that you're in today.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Johnston Williamson. I go by JW, just so you understand the connection here between my introduction and Kristen's references. Anyway, I come from actually the DoD side of the house. I was an IT engineer program manager by career, by trade. Did about 25 years in IT acquisition, ACAT 1, PM type stuff for the Department of the Army. And then the last 10 years, except for about the last week or couple, I've been working at the Technology Acquisition Center for the Department of Veterans Affairs as Director of Engineering. If those that are not familiar there, that was stood up 10 years ago when I started to go ahead and try to centralize a lot or the vast majority of the IT acquisition work that was done within the VA. Just a short period of time, I transitioned over to the Office of Strategic Sourcing within the VA, and I'm now the Director of Category Management for IT Services within the VA. So I'm going to be leading a lot of efforts as far as trying to accomplish a lot of the initiatives and so forth that Kristen was making reference to as far as FSSI and trying to be better stewards of taxpayer dollars, meet some of the initiatives that Tracy was just talking about to try to make things quicker and faster and better for the end user while still thinking big from a strategic sourcing perspective.
Thanks, JW. And Mike, you've also had a really exciting career. I actually think our paths probably crossed while we were both overseas working on different acquisition initiatives. So if you could just talk a little bit about, your background and kind of what led you to the current position that you have with NOAA.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Mike Conroy. I spent 23 years in the Army and the military side. First 8 years or so was in transportation and logistics, and then I went into the military acquisition corps, and the last 14 years I spent doing a mixture of contracting and program management, a lot of overseas assignments in contracting, doing contingency operations and so forth. Spent 4 years in the Defense Contract Management Agency overseeing larger programs, and spent a year and a half as a director for one of their Seattle offices. My last assignment was in Huntsville at the Army Contracting Command headquarters, and I retired there in 2016 and was hired by NOAA into the Strategic Sourcing Acquisition Division as the IT Services Branch Chief. IT Services is one of the two main areas of spend for NOAA in terms, of strategic sourcing. You have professional technical services and then the IT services. So I did that for 2 years, and the main program I support there is called the NOAA Link program. NOAA Link is not a contract like many people think. It's actually a suite of contracts for IT commodities and services that we strategically source either at the enterprise level or government level or both. And then we are also doing the NOAA Mission IT Services contract, which is actually out on solicitation right now. That's a strategically sourced vehicle for IT services that we're also leveraging GSA Federal Supply Schedule under the category management principles to award that. Then on the ProTech side, that's also a program and a contract. It's a series of 4 different domain contracts. In that case, those are scientifically oriented professional technical services, so we award full and open IDIQs for those, and then we manage the program within the Strategic Sourcing Acquisition Division. I took over as the Deputy Director in March for Strategic Sourcing, so that now expands my breadth of responsibilities with regard to strategic sourcing. We also do some other enterprise level support in terms of high performance computing and construction, supporting our corporate services staff office.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So that was a great background on yourself, as well as, kind of where NOAA is right now with strategic sourcing. So JW, where is VA right now with adopting strategic sourcing?
All right. So I would say I don't want to say we're in infant stages, but, because we've been very involved, my time at the TAC, very involved with GSA and OMB as far as the initiatives, as far as all the category management work groups for laptops, desktops, mobile, et cetera. So we've played a big role as part of the work group to go ahead and help identify those requirements and then follow those requirements in some of the enterprise vehicles we actually have within the VA specifically, as far as T4 and T4 Next Gen, which is an enterprise IT services vehicle, where we try to strategize as far as the sourcing for IT services within the VA. There were other commodity vehicles as well, but we also make heavy usage with respect to other vehicles like SOUP and like to go ahead and try to promote economies of scale, requirements, consolidation efforts, and trying to make smarter buys for the taxpayer.
Great, thank you. So Mike, how has strategic sourcing improved procurement at your agency, and what is NOAA really hoping to achieve with this strategic sourcing initiative?
So our big goal at NOAA is always to identify a reasonably small number of highly capable companies that can support our unique science mission. So that's sort of our top level principle, and everything flows down from there. What we do then is apply category management principles and how we can streamline the process for our buying to make it faster. So if you use a government-wide acquisition contract like NASA SOUP and use it for your IT commodity buys and some other IT buys, it makes the process more streamlined. You start to get data that you can request from the program office that supports them. So you save money, you streamline the process, And then you're also then able to start to have better data to do your spend analysis on, which is a really challenging part of the whole strategic sourcing part, is the upfront part of having the data so that you can analyze your spend so that you can then come up with a plan for a strategic sourcing solution. So applying those principles has done those things for us. But we're continuing to evolve as category management is continuing to evolve.
Great, thank you. So JW, you mentioned that VA is really in its sort of infancy with strategic sourcing. And I know, the Technology Acquisition Center has really adopted some really innovative strategies for acquisition, but VA is really just starting to truly adopt strategic sourcing best practices. So what are some of the challenges, you're 2 weeks into your new job, what are some of the challenges that you see related to the full adoption of strategic sourcing for the VA?
So from my perspective, to go to one of Mike's points, a lot of what strategic sourcing is based on is data. The utilization collection of that data, the utilization data as well as the spend data, not just contracts, but then requirements. How that data is collected, how it's refined, how it's analyzed, to support some of the different initiatives and so forth we've been talking about. Mike's past experience within the VA, that's, I believe, been a challenge, especially when you're dealing with such a broad, shall we say, audience with, over 160 medical centers and so forth, to try to get your hands wrapped around that whole area of requirements to support consolidation and economies of scale, streamlining acquisition to try to leverage innovative ideas, I see as kind of one of the first challenges. Second challenge I have, to touch on the supplier management component, is under strategic sourcing and supplier management, vendor management methodologies in the private sector, I can go ahead and use KPIs, SLAs, performance type characteristics, monitor the vendor's performance, and then incentivize and or reward the vendors directly as a result of that. In the federal space, you have some additional challenge with respect to federal acquisition regulations, competition, and the like. And how to go ahead and leverage that, not to just perform the post-award management that I think we often struggle with, in my personal opinion, but then also to reward and incentivize the private sector, such that when they do perform like that and we track that and they make appropriate adjustments, that we can reward them and leverage what they can bring to the table. I would be remiss within the VA side of the house. We have to follow the Vets First public law. So, you have small business, and I know some of the GWAC vehicles and so forth have their components for SDVOSBs and the like. And I'm not a contracting person or a legal person, but I understand there are some hurdles that are slowly being worked out with respect to that. And I'll throw this on top, is there's been a big buzzword or a series of buzzwords called managed services. I think I personally have a question as far as not only how are we going to implement managed services within the federal space, but then how are the FSSI vehicles going to be either how do they currently or how do they need to adapt to be able to support that?
All right, great, thank you. So in both of your professional opinions, and Mike, we'll start with you, what is the future of federal acquisition as it relates to strategic sourcing, and what do you see as the benefits of the federal government moving into this direction?
I think the future is what we're seeing right now with category management and the promotion of best-in-class contracts, which many of the current government-wide acquisition contracts are also designated as best-in-class. It's a process they have to go through with OMB to get that designation. And then the guidance that comes down is to promote the use of those best-in-class contracts. What that means for industry is that there's going to be a continued effort to reduce the number of individual contracts that agencies award, and instead to leverage those government-wide contracts to execute task orders for those services. And so I always tell the vendors that we engage with at NOAA that they should be constantly looking for opportunities to be on those vehicles, because there's going to be less full and open, less separate contract awards. And so if you're not on those vehicles, then you won't be able to participate as much. I think the benefit, again, for us as a smaller bureau, so you have really large agencies like the Department of Defense and then the Department of Army and so forth and so on. NOAA is not that large. We're a small bureau. We don't have as many resources. And so the idea is that we avoid a lot of costs by not having to go through those larger acquisitions and being able to leverage those contracts that are already in place. Again, it saves us time. When you're using under the FAR Part 8 procedures, which is the federal supply schedules, or FAR Part 16, which is executing orders off of IDIQs, those parts of the FAR are by nature streamlined. So it makes it easier to get to an award as opposed to using FAR Part 15 procedures. So the benefit, again, for us is cost avoidance, streamlined acquisition procedures. It narrows down so that you can develop those strategic partnerships with a smaller number of vendors, especially, again, for a smaller bureau like ours that we don't spend as much. So we don't need as large of a base, but we need a very good one and one that's focused on our needs. So that's pretty much sums up kind of what I think where it's going and what the benefits are.
Thank you. JW?
To piggyback on some of the things Michael was just talking about, I think that from the strategic mindset of making less buys, it's going to drive our agency as well as some of the other agencies to think bigger, do better requirements and acquisition planning, which I personally feel we've struggled with. I would say not only on that would facilitate the front end, right, as far as you don't necessarily need more enterprise contracts as much as just being able to capture and reflect your requirements more from an enterprise perspective. Whether you put more vehicles together or leverage existing vehicles can be determined later as part of the strategy workout. On the back end, as far as post-award, I kind of touched on this a little bit before, but hopefully to strengthen our knowledge and use of, again, KPIs, SLAs, and so forth, to actually monitor the vendor's performance, do a better job as far as post-award management. Even, I've been through a lot of technical evaluations in my 10 years at the TAC. There's a factor called past performance. I have yet to see an acquisition, and I'm sure there's a lot of other ones, but I have yet to really see an acquisition decision that's really been driven by past performance. It's always best value as far as technical compared to your cost. And I know there's a lot of other factors as far as vets involvement, and those are all important, and past performance is important. I think we could take it to possibly to another level. I think that's what I'm trying to point out here. And then just simply accountability. With all this information, both on our side as far as planning and on the vendor side as far as performance, we're going to be able to hold people, agencies, organizations more accountable to be doing things smarter and faster.
Great, thank you. So not sure if any of you have seen it, but there was a recent GAO study that revealed that the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative has resulted in procurement savings of nearly $500 million in the last 5 years. So the challenge is that only 10% of addressable government-wide spend went through the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative vehicles. So why do you think agencies are not living up to their commitments of leveraging these solutions? Mike?
So one thing I would start out with is I think that this whole process and the way that it's explained too in the guidance is that the key performance indicators, they measure maturity in the process of category management. And so I'd say I think that GAO report was in 2016. I would say in the last 3 years, just like with a lot of other things, the maturity has increased dramatically, and that agencies now, all the arrows are pointing in the right direction, but it's still a maturity process. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time for all of these processes to play out. Contracts have timelines to them. You're not going to end contracts because you have new guidance. So it gets factored into the acquisition planning process. But I think I looked on the acquisition gateway, which is managed by GSA, and I think in FY18, of the 6 key performance indicators, government-wide, they were met or exceeded in 5 of the 6 categories. The one that didn't quite meet the goal was the reduction in contracts, and that goal was set at 10%, and I think the government achieve 7%. So there's still a reduction in contracts, just didn't quite meet the goal. So I think all the arrows are pointing in the right direction, but there's always going to be more to do, but it is a maturity process.
JW, any other thoughts on why you think agencies are maybe not using some of these FSSI solutions?
Well, I don't know if I have to be careful for what I say, being from the TAC or my past experience with the TAC, but you know, and there's, as I said, there's the Vets First challenge that we have within the VA that's unique to our agency. There are issues or questions as far as fees and so forth that the agency has to pay to other organizations to go ahead and utilize those vehicles. And there's actually been recent changes in some of the vehicles as far as fee and structure and so forth that I think needs to be discussed and worked out to go ahead and better incentivize other agencies in the VA to go ahead and make better use of that and maximize the dollar to maximize the return to the veteran or whatever customer you might be working with. But really the big picture is, I think, the requirements piece. Again, there's been such a struggle, in my opinion, with respect to collecting requirements. Lots of times the contracting folks are dealing with little pieces that are coming in and going out, first in, first out, and there's not necessarily enough effort on the front end to plan and consolidate so that the requirement you're passing to the contracting community is the strategic vision so that I can easily leverage the vehicles that best provide that service, like the GWAC vehicles.
Do you think agencies really want to own, they want to own their own vehicles, and that's why they're not moving towards some of these larger GWACs?
I do. So that's why in our case, going back to our strategic goal of having a reasonably small number of suppliers that support our mission. So how do we come up with an acquisition strategy that meets that and also meets the category management principles? And so that's where, in our case with Nimitz, we decided on a solution where we can do a multiple award BPA off of IT Schedule 70. So then we do get that smaller slice that we need. We are meeting category management principles. The cost issue is out there, and that does come up sometimes when you're presenting an acquisition plan, and then you're starting to show the fee that you have to pay for access to the contract. So that discussion does occur. But those GWACs, they're doing the best that they can to minimize those fees. But the other thing that we can start doing as a smaller bureau that doesn't have a GWAC is we can compare and contrast those GWACs, and we can start to select the one that meets the criteria for what we're trying to do in terms of minimizing the cost that we have to pay for access to the contract and so forth. So that does come up.
I guess just one thing I'd like to add with respect to the conversation here is strategic sourcing, right? Big picture buying, making best for your buck, reducing administration costs, things like that. As even set up, you have best-in-class GWAC vehicles, which most of the conversation has been revolving around. There are vehicles like, I'll toot the horn for the VA as far as the T4. It is a tier 2 vehicle, multi-agency vehicle that is used by other external agencies. That may be other opportunities, again, as far as, again, the end game of buying things strategically. I think that there's probably several, it's just one of the tools in the toolbox of the regular contracting officer. And however we can go ahead and adapt those vehicles to make them the best, the quickest, the cheapest, whoever prevails there will be the leader.
Great, thank you.
One other thing
go ahead.
One other thing in terms of the maturity of it is the definition of common. So in our professional technical services area, we don't consider our scientific professional technical services to be common. And so that discussion comes up a lot also with IT. What is common and what is specialized services? The idea behind category management and use of GWACs is those are common services. So that's another point of discussion that occurs along the way in the process. Sorry.
It's a great point. Thank you. So we're just about out of time, but I wanted to open it up to the audience to see if anybody has any questions for our panelists this morning. Yes.
As a complete newbie to this event, excuse me, I'm just representing myself actually. I'm wondering if in NOAA and the IT kind of wheelhouse that you oversee, does that also include acquisition of people trying to bring scientific innovations to you? I'm actually in the sustainability background, but I'm coming into the IT arena. And I'm just wondering if y'all are already making those connections, because cybersecurity is a big missing part in terms of like facilities and that type of stuff. So I'm just wondering if y'all are already looking in that direction.
Yes, and in fact, if you look at a lot of our current NOAA Link vendors, they started out as science companies that then drifted over into IT. So there's definitely a merger between the two in NOAA, and we have constant discussions about whether is it a professional technical service or is it an IT service. And so we look at there's always science in there, and then there's always IT in there, and so it kind of depends on which one's the predominant. Are we doing science supported by some IT, or are we doing IT applying it to scientific methods and objectives and so forth? So that comes up a lot. We're constantly talking about that. But if you look at the background of the companies that are on our current NOAA Link contract, most of them are not straight up IT companies. They started out as something else and then started doing IT services along the way. So that gives them that operational insight that makes supporting our unique mission better.
Great. Okay, well, we are out of time, but I want to thank both of you very much for being here today talking about this really important topic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Kristen. Thank you to JW as well as Mike for joining us as well. Our final keynote is going to be, some might say we've saved the best for last. We're going to have Leslie Field join us for a fireside chat. She is the Deputy Administrator of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy with OMB, and just coming off serving as the Acting Administrator, which technically true and still kind of, I don't want to get in trouble there on that. But, all right, so if you don't mind joining me up top. All right, so if you'll just sit here, and we'll go right here. All right. So Leslie, you came on with OMB, joining as the Deputy Administrator in 2008, and actually have served as the Acting Administrator 4 times now.
Forever, yes. Yep.
So let me talk a little bit more about OFPP, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. I'll talk a little bit about what some of the roles there. So over there, they develop and implement government-wide regulations and policies to support $450 billion in federal contracting each year. They're leading initiatives to strengthen the acquisition force, leverage the government's buying power, and improving transparency. So could you kind of talk a little bit about, a little bit more about the program there and some of the roles with OFPP to kind of kick off? And then we'll go from there?
Absolutely. So I like to think of what we do as kind of an arc in the acquisition world, and actually we're up to $550 billion now.
Okay.
So when you think about the $550 billion that we spend every year, about 2/3 of that is really for common goods and services, things that every agency has to buy in order to do their mission. The other third is really sort of the unique acquisitions that agencies have to conduct in order to meet their mission needs. So when you think about that, it kind of helps to organize what we're doing around category management, which we've talked about, sharing quality services, and then we'll talk a little bit about the innovation work that we're doing. Even within the constraints of the 2,000-page FAR, there are some flexibilities in there that we want the workforce to understand how to use, and then making sure, obviously, that we've got our data running across the bottom and that we're using it for the maximum impact, and making sure, of course, that our workforce is trained. So that kind of gives you a visual picture, and we can talk a little bit about the elements moving forward.
All right, wonderful. So you mentioned category management. That's been a major initiative that you've overseen. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of category management? And I think what really stood out to me was the ability to free up some folks in the acquisition space to really take on some of those bigger challenges once that kind of gets brought together.
Exactly. So when you think about kind of what we buy it from 3,200 different procurement operations within the government. There are 40,000 contracting officers, probably 100,000 program managers and other folks involved in the process. So it's really complex. And for the most part, probably 5-10 years ago, folks really doing things kind of on their own. And so when you get that kind of fragmentation, you're not getting the best pricing, you're not getting the best terms and conditions, you're really putting a lot of burden on industry, and of course, contracting officers are stretched anyway, and so having them do the same thing over and over again doesn't make a lot of sense. So when we moved to the category management, we sort of took the lessons we learned from strategic sourcing and moved towards the category management strategy, which is really a little bit more all-encompassing. We really found that finding best-in-class vehicles, getting 10 contract managers looking across the government at 10 common categories of spend really moved the needle. For the first time, we were looking across agencies. We had vendor relationship requirements so that we were meeting with vendors on a more regular basis. We were getting pricing information that we hadn't had before. So it was all of this data, all of these relationships being built, and a lot of leadership. And I think we've really turned the tide. And as you said, we want our time and talent to kind of move up that arc. So when we have those high visibility, high risk contracts, we want our talent and our workforce to spend their time there.
Well, speaking of workforce, what are some areas that you've seen, especially since 2008, where the government has succeeded in trying to bring in some new talents into their acquisition workforce? We've seen so many talented folks on stage here and sitting in the crowd. I think that it seems to be working. No?
Yeah, so I came to OMB a million years ago to do acquisition workforce policy because DoD was kind of organized, but the civilian agencies maybe not so much. So we put in place the Federal Acquisition Certification Program for the civilian agencies. And so that's kind of the foundational work that we did. But what we found over the last couple of years, especially in IT, because IT is very specialized and people are buying IT in new and different ways, as Tracy talked about, we started the Digital IT Acquisition Professionals Program. And that was a really interesting way for us to say to the workforce, like, you've got the foundational skills, but let's add this particular certification, this credential, so that when you buy IT, you know kind of how folks are doing it. Because it's changing so quickly, we want to make sure that the acquisition workforce is able to keep up with all of that. So we started the DITEP program. We put the Federal Acquisition Certification for Digital Services in place. So again, another credential that our workforce can use in order to help us meet our IT mission needs. So I think that program sort of combined with the work that we're doing at the Federal Acquisition Institute, and then thinking about ways to deliver content when you need it instead of taking a class and then hoping maybe that will be useful somewhere down the road, really delivering that kind of training when you need it and those resources.
Okay. I think one of the things that was interesting earlier was Tracy Walker from USDS saying that the industry has provided more feedback and gotten more aggressive in talking to the government about different ways to do that. How have you seen it, working with industry and that relationship? How has that gone back and forth in your 10 years from doing this?
I'll do a quick quiz. How many folks here have heard of the Mythbusters series from OFPP? Oh, yay. Everybody knows that one. That's good. So probably this was back in 2011, I think. We realized that there was a bit of a gap between the workforce and industry. I think the acquisition workforce wanted to make sure they weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't giving anybody an advantage where they shouldn't. And so there was a bit of a sort of a communication gap there. We issued the first of 4 Mythbusters back in 2011 to say it is all right to meet with industry. In fact, it's not just all right, you need to do it. You need to make sure that you understand your market. Otherwise, you won't be able to negotiate in the best interest of the government. You won't know what to buy. You won't be able to develop your requirements. So that was incredibly important in kind of setting some sort of top cover, I think, for our contracting folks. We just recently issued Mythbusters 4, which was really about the innovation space, because we're doing some really fantastic work, again, within the 4 walls of the FAR. There are a lot of flexibilities out there that we want to make sure contracting officers know how to use. DHS is doing a fantastic job. GSA, there are a lot of agencies that are really starting to push this innovation agenda so that the other sort of third of that arc is better served by some of the ways that we can do business without changing a law, without changing a regulation, just lifting out some of those flexibilities. Advisory down selects, oral proposals, show me, don't tell me kinds of proposals, same day evaluations. There's a lot that we can do, and that I think is really helpful when we've got an industry partnership and the government folks talking together.
Okay. The Acquisition Innovation Advocates Council, how is that informing OMB's approach to acquisition?
Yeah, so when we said, gosh, this innovation thing is pretty cool and we want to expand upon it, we actually asked the CFO Act agencies to designate an innovation advocate. Again, that top cover is really important. I think in our community, it really helps to have senior managers say, it's okay to take a chance. It's okay to take a risk. I'll be behind you. And so that's what those innovation advocates are meant to do. The other thing we really learned is sharing stories is really, really important, right? We issue a lot of paper and we talk a lot, but when you read a story, and if you're a contracting officer or program manager, and you see yourself in that story, and you see the requirements, and you can kind of see how it might apply to what you're doing, that's the most powerful thing. So that council has been incredibly helpful in identifying some really important best practices and even the worst practices. You can learn a lot from the mistakes, right? It's okay to share those too. So I think that council has really helped us think about that.
Worst practices. I like
Worst
that.
practices,
Okay,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to continue
I
with
like
that. So we talked a little bit about the importance of data a little bit earlier. What are some of the emerging technologies that you see where the government can take advantage, and OMB specifically can take advantage of a lot of the data that's being supplied to improve buying?
Yes. So I'm sure folks are familiar with FPDS, the Federal Procurement Data System. We collect a lot of data, right, on every transaction. I think we have something like 44 million transactions a year. I mean, millions and millions, right, bits of data. Are we really leveraging that data as a strategic asset? And one of the cross-agency priority goals is doing a better job with that. We have so much information. The integrated award environment captures a lot of information. There are data sets out there that we haven't even figured out how to bring in to make our jobs easier and better. So the data piece, I think, the data modernization arc is something that we're really going to focus on probably in the next couple of years. We've done a lot with the IEE, but I think bringing in some new data sets using AI, figuring out how to use RPA so that we can spend our time thinking about the data, I think will be really important. I'll give you a good example. In category management, the PMO over at GSA has done a tremendous job of pulling data in from the sources that we have, cleaning it up, doing text mining, making magic happen, and then putting it out there on dashboards so that the people who make decisions, like the CIOs and the CAOs, actually have the information that they need. And we got such an overwhelmingly positive response that need for data is huge. And so I think that's really where we need to focus, is how do we present information in a way that the decision makers can make those decisions.
What are some of the biggest trends that you've seen over the past few years within acquisition? We've seen a lot of talk about speed. OTAs are brought up quite a bit. But from your perspective, what are some of the major trends that you've seen in terms of improving the inserting technologies within government agencies?
Yeah, so I think the information sharing continues to be a challenge. When you think about the size and the scope of our system, so it's not just the folks in the federal government, but all the contractors out there, and then all of the companies and on sort of all of the competing demands. I think sharing that information about how technology can help and how to buy it has been a huge challenge. I think we need to work on the communication front. I have found that there is a bit of an awareness gap on the front lines with respect to a lot of things. And so we started an in-reach campaign for the contracting folks within the government, so that when we issue a policy or there's a new technology that might be helpful, or if there's a new way to look at data, that we can get that information to the front lines a lot faster. And that we can also hear back from them about what could we do to make your life easier? How could you learn how to buy these technologies? How can you figure out what companies can help you do your jobs? And so I think there's that communication gap is something that we're really focused on. InReach is part of it, but that's probably a big one.
What are some of the methods in terms of that communication that's been working best? I know that's sometimes in terms of communication between government and industry is something that's sensitive. What are some of those methods that you've seen to have the most success?
Right. So going back to the Mythbusters, I think that has helped some of the government to industry conversations. But I think creating sort of communities for the federal workers, so for the contracting officers on the acquisition gateway, if you haven't been there, there's a government side and there's a public side, creating those communities so that people can share information, that they can talk to their colleagues about what they're doing. Chances are you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So I think having those conversations, sharing those stories, recognizing success, I think is awfully important in making sure that folks kind of understand what's going on out there. So I think you have to hit communications on a lot of different fronts, but the storytelling and the human connection, I think, is the most important.
Okay. Having that unique experience about going over administrations from starting from 2008 to the new administration, what are some of the challenges with that, and what are ways to be most successful in just kind of maintaining?
Yeah, I think when you tell the new folks coming in that your office is responsible for $500 billion worth of stuff, they pay attention. And then you put the FAR down with a pocket version that's like this big, and they're like, oh my gosh, wow, okay, you do that. So I think it's a complex system, and I think because it is pretty organized and structured, I feel like every time we've had a turnover, folks feel like at least there are regulations, there are processes, there's a workforce, it's organized. The results have been, pretty good. So I think they feel pretty confident. The nice thing about it is it's really the perfect intersection of business and government. And so it's sort of nonpartisan, right? Everybody wants to do the right thing. They want the best value for the taxpayer. They want to get their missions met. And so it does really feel like it's been nonpartisan. We've been very lucky. We've had great leadership across the board since I've been at OMB, and I think we've really done a lot in the last handful of years to move category management in particular. I think the last panelist talked about the pretty significant goals that we've met with respect to cost avoidance and moving the spend under management. So we are applying those category management principles. So I think that success, I think, helps us to be sort of continue from administration to administration.
Okay. Speed has been a common theme this morning. What are some of the areas in which you've seen fast tracking succeed, and where are some of the challenges that you also see where it comes up?
So we talked about the innovation space and some of the work that DHS and some of the other agencies are doing, and a lot of that revolves around doing things faster and sort of taking some of the process out of it, which is important. And I think there are lots of ways that we can improve there, right? The FAR was written for a different time, before technology really changed how we bought and how we paid. So we need to catch up with that. But there are some important guardrails that I don't want to see go away. And so making sure we can figure out how to modernize without throwing away the core principles that we've got that have kept us, I think, moving forward, I think that's the biggest challenge. We absolutely need to move faster. And I think we need to share some of those practices. That's why that innovation part of the ARC is so important, and getting the word to the folks on the front lines, because they can do all of these things today, and it can save a tremendous amount of time and a lot of money, reduces the burden on both sides of the equation. So that's really important. But I think we need to make sure that we don't throw out some of the really important principles that the acquisition system is based on just for speed.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, have you seen any examples of that where maybe risk has gotten a little bit too high and almost had to pull back, and maybe some of the speed and trying to move that forward too quickly?
I'm sure there are examples out there. I think our primary challenge is really making sure that the contracting officers feel like they can take those risks. So while you want to be careful that you don't do something wrong, I think really our challenge now is to give folks that cover, make sure they understand that those risks are worth taking in many cases, making sure that the leadership agrees with that. Obviously, we don't want to push something that the leadership is not happy about, but I think everybody sort of across the board realizes that there needs to be change, there needs to be modernization, but again, not throwing out the core principles that have gotten us where we are today.
Okay. We were talking a little bit about data and some of the emerging technologies that the government's looking to bring on. How has the boom in mobile technology kind of changed the government's approach to acquisition?
So I'll take it from a category management perspective. So I think before we started doing category management in IT, we had lots of folks doing mobile policies and mobile buying, and we really weren't organized. And now we have an IT category manager, GSA, Bill Zielinski. We have a mobile services category team. So for the first time, we've got people who are just focused on that. I mean, they've got other jobs too, but they're really focused on figuring out, how does the government buy mobile? What are the opportunities? How should we pay for it? How should we bring it onto our networks? I think there are a lot of questions that we would have asked and answered separately, but now that we've got this sort of lens of let's do this together, let's go to market as the world's largest buyer, let's make sure that we're getting those terms and conditions that are most favorable to the government, and spending time on that, I think that has really helped us a lot. In terms of the mobile technology, I know for the acquisition workforce, we've been working on sort of training knowledge nuggets, I think they call it, on mobile devices, so that people, as they're commuting in the morning, they can get information. They can take a training or a simulation on their phone. So I think we're using it in a number of different areas, but I think that sort of the overarching message is that we've actually got people focused on it government-wide.
Okay. I was going to follow up on that. What are some of the trainings that you see for the acquisition workforce to take a lot of that talent within in-house and improve it?
Yeah, so I think she might have gone, but we talked a little bit about the Digital IT Acquisition Professionals Program, and when we started that, Joni Newhart in my office is the Acquisition Workforce Associate Administrator, and we said, well, gosh, we really need to train our acquisition people on how to buy IT, because it was modular, it was agile, and we had to figure out how to buy it differently. And so we said, well, we don't really know how to do that. So we issued a challenge. And if you guys are familiar with the challenge option, instead of going through a procurement, we just said to the world, we don't really know how to do this. We know that there are smart people out there who can figure it out. We had a little bit of money set aside so that small and large businesses could team. We got some great ideas in. We did mock training. We had some judges come in and assess the mock training. So instead of reading a lot of proposals and words on pages, they actually saw how these teams performed. And we selected one, and we came up with a pilot for the DITAP program. It's now in production. I think Tracy said we'll have almost 200 people, I think, by the end of the year. So that has been incredibly successful. It's not just classroom-based, but they actually sit with an IT technologist and figure out how to buy things differently. And that's been huge. We also pushed a long time ago, we still are pushing for IT cadres within the agencies, so that if you buy IT, you're kind of all together and you're buying IT, because it changes so rapidly that it's sort of being with folks that are doing the same things has been really important. VA, I think, has a very good program that they can point to. A lot of agencies do, but that's another model. IT is huge, right? We buy $65 billion on contract for IT, but professional services, we buy even more. Facilities and construction, we buy even more than that. So when you think about where the government spends its money, making sure that we've got people trained in those specific disciplines, I think has been really, really critical.
Okay. We were talking about category management quite a bit here. What are some of the challenges that still exist with it to kind of take it to that next level?
So the awareness part of it, I still think that's problematic. I think it's a challenge, but I think we've really turned the tide so that folks understand where they can go to get their, what existing contracts are out there on the gateway. For the first time, we have a list of all the contracts, what they provide, what the fees are, how to order, all of just sort of the nuts and bolts things that contracting officers need to know. So there's that piece of it. I think the guidance that we put out recently really does help to harmonize the small business obligations with the category management principles. And so that will continue to be a discussion and a dialogue, but those two, they're not mutually exclusive. And in the best-in-class contracts for the last cycle, we actually exceeded the statutory goal by about 7-8%. So we can actually meet our category management principles and promote the participation of small businesses. So continuing to have those dialogues, I think, is really important. And then the data piece, because we talked about it a little earlier, is really important to show that these contracts have value. I think, for a long time, people were doing it because we told them to do it, and that's not really helpful, right? That doesn't go very far. It doesn't last that long. So we need to prove the value in all of these solutions and in the program generally. And I think people now are beginning to realize, maybe the last couple of years, well, gosh, we don't need to reinvent the wheel for IT hardware or software. There are other folks who are spending their time figuring that out. We'll let them do that, and we are going to spend our time doing this other thing that is really more unique to this agency or this mission. And so proving that value, again, we evaluate the best-in-class contracts on a regular basis, but we need to continue to do that so that folks understand that the performance piece, we're looking at it and we're making sure that they continue to deliver that value.
Interesting. So, like I kind of said in the beginning, you mentioned too, having that category management opens up, allows more of the acquisition professionals to tackle some of those bigger challenges. What would you see as those biggest challenges going within OMB right now?
So I think that if we want for people to spend time on the more complex requirements, it's the requirements development that I think is really critical. I think your last panelist talked about that too. One of my favorite things in the Department of Defense is the service acquisition workshop. It's a process, a facilitated process where you have everybody in the room who is really important to that acquisition. The IT people, the contracting people, the lawyers, the private, whatever it is that you're buying, you've got everybody there. It's a facilitated process to get to your requirements. It's been very successful, and we'd like to bring a little bit more of that to the civilian agencies, so we're thinking about ways to do that. But honestly, the requirements piece of it is really critical. Obviously, performance metrics, you've got to have that. And then having structured, meaningful engagement with industry at the appropriate time during the planning process. Okay. I think those are the really important elements.
Okay. Are there specific agencies that you could see taking that on first in terms of that pivot and introducing that?
So we work with all of the agencies. I don't know if you know, but the top 7 agencies are responsible for 85% of what we spend, right? So in the category management world anyway, and really in the innovation world, spending our time with the leadership there has been really helpful. DHS, of course, has been great. DOD, the VA, all of them have been really embraced sort of the elements of the modernization plan that we've got here. It is really up to us to help them see where they can pilot some of these initiatives. So a lot of the things that we've got here, we piloted them first. We started small, so in case it didn't work out, nobody would know. But that we would fail quickly, and that we'd be able to recover and do something else. So making sure that we forge those relationships with the leaderships in these agencies, especially the big ones, and then asking them to, can you help us with a pilot? Could you, donate a couple of resources so we can figure out what this looks like? That's been very successful.
Okay. We've got a couple minutes left, but I wanted to see, does anyone have any questions out there that they'd like to ask Leslie? Anybody? Phil? Okay.
At the end of the day.
Is the end of
the session.
Middle of the day, right?
It's the end of the session, yeah.
Okay, well, so I guess I had a couple remaining questions. We talked a lot about category management, but are there other top priorities that you see, within these next couple years that you'd like to achieve over at OMB?
Yeah, so I think that the other 2 pillars, we talked a little bit about the workforce and the modernization of that. How do you get talent into the workforce? How do you keep them engaged? How do you train them for all of the new ways that we're doing business, and especially in the innovation space? So that, I think, is critically important. We did a great job with the certification programs, and that was kind of the foundation, but I do think we need to modernize how we train our talent, which is really the most important thing that we have in the acquisition space. And then on the data piece, modernizing not only how we capture the information, but what we do with it. That's probably where we'll spend a lot of time in the next couple of years. Again, as I said, we spend a lot of money on the data and the information, turning it into meaningful and actionable information, I think is really the challenge coming up. The innovation space, we did talk a little bit about. That is all about the communication. So if you're a federal employee, definitely go to the Acquisition Gateway, sign up for the InReach, go and check it out, the OFPP InReach. We're trying really to get our policies, the tools, the resources, and everything out to the contracting officers so that they know where to go. And then obviously on the other side, the Acquisition Gateway has a lot of information for industry alike.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Leslie. I appreciate the time and fantastic comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, with that concludes our Acquisition Innovation CXO Tech Forum. Thank you so much for everybody for joining us and being a part of this. Fantastic discussion all the way through. Our next CXO Tech Forum is going to be focused on cybersecurity. It's going to be here again. It's going to be on July 18th. So hope to see as many faces as possible there as well. So thank you very much.